soon as they took that out of her diet, it stopped her night terrors. So I think if it's something that's causing you real distress, or you're hurting yourself, hurting somebody, go to the doctor and see what they can do. But otherwise, maybe it's a lifestyle thing that you can have a look at and see if there's something that you need to change to get rid of them. I mean, personally, I find them quite fascinating, so I'm happy to just kind of suffer them a few times a month.
So a lot of people are going to be asking, I said right at the beginning, what is the difference between a nightmare and a night terror then? Are you saying that a nightmare, it just goes on in your head and you wake up and you remember it? But is that the same with night terrors?
Yeah, well, nightmare is an interesting term, actually, because it nowadays we take it to mean that it was a bad dream. We had a nightmare, it was a bad dream. But actually the word nightmare comes from what we used to call sleep paralysis. So it used to be two words, the night and mare. This mare used to be thought of as a possessed horse that would come into people's bedrooms, yes, really, and trample people's chests in their sleep. So that's where we get the word nightmare from, even though nowadays we just say, it means a bad dream. It actually used to mean sleep paralysis. So a nightmare, I think we just sort of say, it's a bad dream that you had. But a night terror, it is this involuntary movement. And I think that's the difference, is that a nightmare, it's just something you experience in a dream, whereas a night terror, it's involuntary movement. You get out of bed, you're running around and screaming, you don't know what's going on, you have this glazed expression, and you often can't remember either. That's a key thing about night terrors, is that you can't remember it.
So can you remember when you have your nightmares, or you sleepwalk as well, or anything like that? Can you remember that?
Yeah, so I don't sleepwalk as often as I used to. I used to sleepwalk quite a lot when I was a child. But if I sleepwalk now, I don't remember doing anything. But usually I'll wake myself up and I'll catch the tail end. So I'll suddenly find myself getting ready for work at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and kind of being like, what am I doing? It's really weird.
Oh, gosh, how weird.
So I just remember like the tail end of that. I had a sleepwalk a few years ago where I just caught myself saying the tail end of, I'll help you find it. And I was sort of had my hand on the light switch, and I just caught the tail end of that. But with things like hallucinations and sleep paralysis, you are awake, really. And so I do remember them quite vividly because I am awake, but I'm still sort of dreaming at the same time. So yes, I do remember them, but that makes good material for the book. So that's something.
It certainly would do. And here's the question for somebody who's got a family member or a loved one who sleepwalks. And I don't know the answer to this. Do you wake that person up? Do you lead them? I'm thinking of scary stories. Do you lead them gently back to bed? Because if they're trotting around the house, unawares of what they're doing, they could put themselves at danger. But that whole thing of, do you wake somebody up, or is that worse? Or do you let them sleep and lead them back to bed? What do you do?
I think there's a myth with sleepwalking that if you wake them up, you will cause them physical harm. I think that's a myth that I've read quite a lot. I think it will certainly distress somebody if you suddenly wake them up and they find themselves not where they're expecting to be. That's going to freak them out quite a lot. What my mum used to do, she was really good at this, is she would find out what I thought was happening, and then she would play along with the narrative. So it's quite creative in a way, I suppose. She would find out what I thought I was doing, and then she would kind of, fill in the blanks and sort of direct the narrative so that it somehow took me back to bed. There's a story in Night Terrors where my mum found me on the landing with my hands like this, out in front of me. So I was cupping something, and she asked me what I was doing, and I said, Mum, I have to give this cake to Gwen Stefani. And she went, well, can't you give it to her in the morning? And I went, yeah, okay. And I just went back to bed. So it was that kind of like, figuring out what I thought was happening and then playing along and be like, well, you can do that in the morning. Go back to bed.
I was going to say, Gwen Stefani's never been the same since she ate that cake. Let's show people the book again. The book is Night Terrors, Troubled Sleep and the Stories That We Tell About It. Absolutely fascinating read, I think, especially at this time of the year. And it's about the very sorts of things we've been talking about. Alice, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. In fact, we've had lots and lots of messages about it, which I'm about to read out. But thank you. Thank you so much for your time. You might want to stay listening. There's the book, Night Terrors, by Alice Vernon, Troubled Sleep and the Stories we tell about it. Curious, lively, humble, and very, very scary. Let me read some of these messages. Loads of messages about ghosts, because I asked you, because we're about to talk to a very old society, chair of the Ghost Club. When I was about 10 or 11, I used to see a white man standing by the cupboard in my bedroom. One Christmas, I saw a couple of white kids by my bed as if they were looking at presents on the shelf. My parents were not impressed. I never saw them again. Oh, it wasn't scary at all. I don't know. I would have been frightened. Ghosts. Trisha, my mum has seen ghosts in our house. She once saw just the legs of a man in our kitchen, which then disappeared. So that's from Sophie. Oh, my gosh. Ghost. Hi, I think I saw a spirit once. I was with a new boyfriend and stayed at his house after a party. Everybody was sleeping on sofas on the floor, etc., and I was offered the bedroom all for myself. Oh, my gosh. The room had a single bed and I fell asleep. Just before dawn, I awoke, and to my horror, there was a man sitting at the end of the bed. He looked me straight in the eye and I just felt he didn't want me there. As the dawn broke, he just disappeared. In the morning, I was told that the host's father had died in that room and in that bed. That's from Linda. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's terrifying. Another kind of horror story that we were just covering, the Bupa and the NHS. Thank you for your message, Nick. Nick says, great show. Everyone knows insurance companies don't want to pay out. Health insurance, no different. And that's from Nick. Also, another story, Trisha, interesting about Dracula and sleep paralysis. I had one episode waking supposedly on my back, heard a whispery, rushing noise and saw hundreds of bare feet, hems of pale gowns fluttering by the bed. Couldn't move. Don't remember anything else. That's from Jenny. Oh, my Jenny MK. That would terrify me. Bupa and NHS, rubbish. All insurance is about profit and making money. I've got one question on private healthcare. When it goes wrong in a private hospital, they call an ambulance. Why? Because it's about making money. Wow. Very, yes, as we highlighted there. Just a couple of messages from earlier when we were talking about the foreign aid. Our military spending has been cut back, and 8 or 9 billion could help protect us from Putin, Russian invasion. For heaven's sake, we could be at war with Russia before long. Use the seized assets of the Russian oligarchs for the foreign aid. The Red Cross Salvation Army has to help UK citizens in poverty. Another one, foreign aid message. I think it would be better to give foreign aid in manpower, machinery, etc., rather than cash. Plus, we are currently spending over 5 million a day on the 70,000 channel migrants. Maybe we wouldn't have to spend that much money, as our guest Assad said really early on in the show, if we didn't leach so much money from many of those countries in the first place. And if the companies, the big corporations based there, actually paid the tax they damn well were due in those countries, then maybe those, whether they're economic migrants or not, maybe those countries would have a chance of actually looking after their poorer citizens, so they wouldn't have to jump on boats. It's a complicated topic, one which I am going to pursue. But the question I asked you, with Halloween coming up, is, and we've had some very spooky stories here, have you had an experience of ghosts and things that go bump in the night, or do you think it's just all something in people's heads? Do give me a call. What are your experiences of the paranormal? That's if you've actually had one. 0344499 1000, 0344499 1000, or do what a lot of our listeners and watchers are doing now, which is text the word talk to 87222, or you can tweet at talkTV. What's your experience? I mean, there seems to be lots of you who've had very scary experiences of ghosts, and you wonder, with so many people talking about them, they must actually exist, or do they? Do you agree? let me know. Lots more to come on The Haunted, and hopefully we'll get our author up to talk about Jerry Lee Lewis, because I'd love to hear that. And if we don't, for some reason, we'll try and get him again. But, you know, we're dealing with lots and lots of different time zones here, and he's in Alabama, so fingers crossed we get him. But one thing we will be looking at is a very ancient club based in Britain called the Ghost Club. Now, if you are a fan of scary stories, let me tell you, you've got a lot more to come. So stay with us for that, and keep your messages on scary stories coming. And we will be back with you in a very short moment. Let me just remind you as well, if you're watching Talk TV at home, you know, and you're watching on your TV, do remember, if you get in your car, hopefully not to flee ghosts. If you get in your car and you're driving, you can listen to Talk TV on Talk Radio. And if you actually are watching Talk TV on YouTube, just remember to add it to your favourites. I think you can do that. You can even get an alert when Talk TV comes up, so you can give it a watch. You might be interested in watching part of our show yesterday. Really interesting part of the show when we blew apart a story that inspired American comic Trevor Noah to talk about Rishi Sunak. We got the actual caller right at the eye of the storm, and he told us the real story. So that's something that you might want to catch up with on YouTube with Talk TV. More to come right after this. Welcome back and thank you for joining me. Absolute nightmare. Excuse the pun here. Stay with me. We were hoping to have Rick Bragg from talking about Jerry Lee Lewis from Alabama. Time changes. I don't know what the reason is. We can't raise him. You notice I'm using all the Halloween things, but we will try and get him back for another week because I absolutely I'm fascinated to hear his story. But let's continue with ghost stories, because lots of you are sending in messages about your personal experiences. So I want to tell you about the Ghost Club. Now, the Ghost Club is the oldest organisation in the world associated with psychical research. It was founded in 1862. It has its roots in Cambridge University, where in 1855, fellows at Trinity College began to discuss ghosts and psychic phenomena. Past members include Dickens and Yeats. We even have mention of him in old minutes. Now, the Ghost Club today is a non-profit social club, and they do what it says on the tin. Joining me now is Alan Murdy, who's chair of the Ghost Club. Alan, thank you so much for joining me pre-Halloween chat. The Ghost Club. So let me ask you the question we've been asking our viewers and our listeners. Have you ever seen a ghost?
Have I ever seen a ghost? Yes, indeed. I have seen at least one apparition, and I've also witnessed what I believe to have been poltergeist activity. So yes, I have indeed witnessed these things myself.
So tell me about the ghost and tell me about the poltergeist.
Well, I have to say it's a ghost which, strangely enough, I would have preferred not to have seen. It was a personal experience which goes back to 2011. And I saw it actually in my bedroom. At the time, I was living up in Suffolk. I was actually caring for my elderly father, who was ill with Parkinson's disease, and I had to get up in the night to attend to my late father. And I went back to bed. I was lying in my bed when, about trying to get back to sleep, when I saw at the end of the bed, admittedly it was dark, it was the morning of January the 23rd, 2011, standing at the end of the bed was the figure of a lady whom I knew, a lady, in fact, I'd had a relationship with 13 years earlier. And our relationship had ended around about 1999, 2000, perfectly amicably, and in fact we stayed friends and on good terms. I actually thought she was in France at the time, but there she was at the end of the bed. Now, it was dark, but I knew it was her. I could recognise the profile, and I lay there for about 30 seconds, and what struck me most of all was a feeling. It was a feeling of depression and sadness. I wasn't scared. And so after about 30 seconds, I switched on the lights. It kind of all pixelated away. The feeling of sadness stayed with me for quite a considerable time. I duly, knowing my psychical research, wrote it down immediately in a bedside book. And, well, at the time, there was nothing more I could do. Then 2 weeks later, I learned, sadly, from mutual friends abroad that in fact was the day that she died. She'd actually been in Britain. She died in the Charing Cross Hospital. And I look at the entry in my bedside book, and I didn't have the heart to do it, but a Ghost Club member who's a genealogist obtained the death certificate. It confirms the same day, as that was my experience. But saying that, there's nothing unusual with that type of experience. There are literally hundreds, probably thousands of reports that have been collected like that since the time the original Ghost Club was founded.
Yes, I know. One of my kids' sisters actually said, I remember when we were kids, said, Mummy, why did you let the babysitter come up in my room and sit on my bed? And my parents said there wasn't any, we didn't have a babysitter. Yes. And she described this lady who sat on her bed. I think she was very, very young at the time. And then my father was, my late father who just passed away, he was a mental health nurse, a psychiatric nurse. And in those days, there was Holloway Sanatorium, which is a very old, very grand building. And he took us kids down to the basement. And we were looking through all of these different ledgers and books and what have you. And we found books relating to the properties that we lived in, because there were tied houses, workers lived in the houses that the hospital owned. So he said, oh, here's our address. So my little sister, Winnie, was looking through this, looked at this picture and said, oh, not knowing that it was a historical, a book, put together of daguerreotypes from the 1900s. So, oh, there's the babysitter. And we read, and it was a young woman who'd lived in the property and who'd passed away around the same time. Well, since then, it was like, I ain't going in your bedroom anymore. I mean, so is it something we pick up? What are ghosts? Are they vibrations? Are they trying to give us a message? What do you think they really are?
Well, that's a very good question, which, of course, people have puzzled about for thousands of years. I don't think there's one single explanation for ghosts. I think there's probably several things going on. Some just seem to be almost like residual pictures, almost just images without any consciousness that are just left behind and seem to be picked up by sensitive people at certain times, certain places. Others, I think, are actually being generated by living people. It is possible to be seen as a ghost when you are alive. And there are well-attested accounts of living apparitions, not necessarily like my own experience of somebody who I found was dying that day, sadly, but there's also cases of people who are alive and well who have been seen as apparitions. Then we have a small number of cases which might suggest survival after death. You hear these a lot from people who've been recently widowed, bereavement cases, where quite often it's a comfort for the people, they sense or see their deceased partner, and those experiences can go on. It's usually in the first few days or weeks or months. Now, skeptical explanation might say these are purely wish fulfillment hallucinations, the effect of trauma, but they are real experiences, whatever. And then we have some more much more difficult cases, and I'm thinking here of ones you actually hear across the world, which are appearances typically of women, female figures, typically seen on roads or bridges, crossing highways or near streams and ponds. Typically, they're dressed in white or monochrome colours, quite often flowing robes. They're known by various names in the different cultures. I mean, they appear from Japan to Ireland, certainly in Latin America, as well as in Great Britain and also in Europe. And they almost seem to be some kind of symbolic representation. One or two other experiences make one wonder if, these come a lot from, again, the Celtic areas of Great Britain, particularly Scotland and the Western Isles, the idea of second sight, and that the apparition may be some kind of precognitive experience, a glimpse into the future. So you'll see it's quite a complex picture. This is what makes the subject so fascinating.
Now, can ghosts be, you talked about poltergeists and things being being moved around. Now, Halloween, the whole thing of, are some ghosts good and some ghosts evil, or are just ghosts are ghosts are ghosts, and we maybe overlay our feelings onto that of the ghost? But, are some ghosts malevolent? Are they kind of out to cause trouble for you?
Well, it's interesting you raise poltergeists. I think in majority of poltergeist cases, these are actually being generated by living people. it used to be thought it was something that was associated with teenagers, adolescents, but in fact, the evidence of poltergeist seems to suggest that older people can attract them or create them. It seems to be a case of people under stress. Quite often, poltergeist cases are in stressed households for one reason or another, and the best theory, or the one that seems most probable, in my opinion, is that the unconscious mind has a kind of mind over matter effect, and known by parapsychologists as psychokinesis. It's an energy created from the unconscious mind at times of stress, and it causes these object movements, these noises. That, I think, probably accounts for about 75% of poltergeist cases. Wow. However, there's always a however with ghosts and the paranormal.
However, yes.
Yeah. About 25% seem to be not person-centred, because those usually last, most of them won't go on for more than about 6 months. And usually if you can get rid of the stress in somebody's life, the phenomena will stop. There is, however, a problem with about 25%, about a quarter, seem to be place-centred. That is, they seem to be something attached to the premises. You hear these a lot with haunted pubs, for instance. And year in, year out, regardless of the licensees, the occupiers, the stories go on of moving glasses, beer taps switching themselves on, objects falling off the bar, pictures moving, footsteps, cold breezes. And it seems that certain poltergeist activity may be more of some kind of presence. Now, whether that presence is good, bad, or indifferent, it's hard to say. It can be alarming or scary, but let me say that generally you've got to be a lot more afraid of the living than anybody here, anybody passed on.
Yeah. Now, tell me about, you investigate these stories, if you hear stories of ghosts and hauntings and what have you. So tell me about, do you use Ouija boards as seances or anything like that?
Generally speaking, I don't encourage the use of Ouija boards. I actually think with Ouija boards, most of the messages, most of the material is actually being generated by the unconscious mind of the people holding the Ouija board seance. Problem is, quite a lot of people have strange things in their unconscious minds, would you believe? It comes out as messages, they get frightened. Some people, it may actually trigger latent psychic abilities, which they then interpret as signs of a haunting. So I say basically don't do it as a game at all, because
don't
of the
mess.
Yeah, don't mess with it. If you're going to do anything seriously, it's best to do it with a serious scientific or serious spiritualist intent. Generally speaking, I have to say my ghost hunting equipment is quite often, the first thing you have to do is listen to people, listen to their experiences. Sometimes my ghost hunting equipment is as little as a pencil, a notebook, and a sympathetic ear. Not everything that somebody thinks is a haunting is necessarily such. Sometimes just giving a person to explain their circumstances seems to bring the phenomena, if that's what it was, to an end. So you have to exercise a bit of psychology and a degree of care. I have to say, on the whole, most ghost hunts don't generally turn up spectacular results, nothing like the films or even, heaven forbid, some of the popular TV programmes.
Without mentioning any. So, so don't mess around with, it's because your subconscious can be playing tricks on you and can give you a nasty scare. Better to be safe than sorry. Thank you so much, Alan. It's so fascinating, really, really fascinating. I can see it would make for a great discussion. The Ghost Club, the oldest organisation in the world associated with psychical research. And Alan Murdy is the chair of the Ghost Club. Wow, I don't know, you even I have to say, Alan, even his voice just gave me a chill running down my spine. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching here on Talk TV. Let me give a thanks to all of my team. We have Carla Battisti, my brilliant producer back in London, Dave Rhodes, Tech Op Dave, Phil Dave, Max Parry, Ash Withers, and David Imaraye. Thank you all to the team back in London. And thank you if you are going out trick or treating. You've got so much to remember, haven't you, after today's show? Stay away from the toffees because the chocolate is probably better for your teeth, and have it all in one go and don't spread it out. Don't use a Ouija board. Be safe if you're trick and treating and what have you. Stay together with a whole group. And if you get frightened by a ghost or anything like that, remember to do your deep breathing. I mean, we've basically covered it all, haven't we? We've got you covered for the rest of the week. I will be back next Saturday with a look at what's behind the news, and again on Sunday with our mental health, physical health and spiritual health and all things interesting. In the meantime, have a fantastic Halloween night. Have a fantastic beginning of the month, and I will be with you in just a week from now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Trisha Goddard, and you have been listening or watching to Talk TV. Take care, and I'll see you next week.
This is Talk TV.
Lively debate, intelligent conversation. Join me, Dr. David Bull, on Talk TV every week.
Vanessa Felds. Join me every weekday from 4 till 7 on talkTV.
Good afternoon and welcome one and all to my Sunday service right here on Talk TV. Lots to get through today, so fasten your seatbelts and prepare for 3 thrilling hours of blockbuster broadcasting. Of course, it's Halloween tomorrow, but we'll leave that to the kids while we focus on the government's very own horror story, the continuing nightmare of the escalating migrant crisis. A petrol bomb thrown into the Dover processing centre by a maniac on a suicide mission this morning, and nearly 1,000 more crossed the channel yesterday, 990 to be precise, pitching up on our beaches in 24 dinghies, with frightened residents in Dover arming themselves and telling tales of home invasion by Albanians fresh from their illegal voyages. This is beyond a sick joke. It's a question we are all tired of asking. But what is the government going to do about a situation that is clearly out of control? 0344 499 1000. But while Labour and the SNP manically demand Suella Braverman's dismissal over some email she shouldn't have sent, surely her tough stance on immigration is what we need to get a grip on this ongoing shambles. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, as more shocking stories emerge chronicling the utter chaos of Liz Truss's brief spell at the top, it turns out that the Russians hacked her phone in a massive security scare over the UK's national secrets. The relief of Rishi at the helm has triggered a bounce in the polls. All of a sudden, Keir and the gang are not so far ahead. Are we ready for Rishi? Looks like we are. Are you? 0344 499 1000. In other news, I'll ask why, after 12 years of allegedly right-wing Conservative rule, Britain is far more left-wing than when the Tories took over. Why did Cameron, May and Johnson let the woke mob win? Why did they let them have their way? Why did they let the lefties triumph in every argument? 0344 499 1000. Also, while our useless cops serve pizzas to eco-nut disruptors, find out how they deal with these gormless green idiots in Germany. Never mind their right to protest. What about the honest citizens' right to complete their journeys and go about their lawful business? What about us? Why do police officers go out of their way to be nice to the protesters and arrest the motorists who try to remove the idiots blocking our roads? 0344 499 1000. Plus, Anne Widdecombe joins me later to lament the plight of the church pews. It is a Sunday, after all. A good Sunday story here. Why are more and more churches ditching traditional pews and replacing them with boring, unattractive, stackable chairs? Stay tuned to find out. Moving on, I'll investigate the extraordinary story of the millionaire businessman who was shot dead on the doorstep of his mansion in one of London's most exclusive avenues in 1985. The police know who did it. So does the victim's family. So why won't the Crown Prosecution Service prosecute? Extraordinary. In royal news, I'll bring you the latest on Bookgate as King Charles braces himself for Harry's bombshell biography Spare. There may be regal trouble ahead. Ben Loughnane from the Bow Group will be casting his expert eye over the migrant crisis. And after that shocking hammer attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband Paul, Greg Swenson is standing by ready to deliver his essential American bulletin. All that and so much more. So don't go anywhere. Stick with me right here, right now, at the home of free speech and common sense, Talk TV. Let's spend Sunday afternoon together. Now, without further ado, let me go straight over to my first guest, political and social commentator, James Melville. Good afternoon, James.
Good afternoon, Kevin. How are you? At least I'm not doing it in a car this week.
Yeah, that's right. Good surroundings today. Better
National
better
property,
backdrop.
it looks like.
Yeah, better backdrop. It's all about how you look. Listen, extraordinary scenes this morning in Dover. Some suicide bomber chucked a petrol bomb into the migrants' processing centre. We think he killed himself afterwards. We're not quite sure. We think there may have been some people damaged. Details are just emerging, so that situation in Dover goes from bad to worse. Yesterday, no fewer than 990 more migrants crossed the Channel in 24 rubber dinghies. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Also, we're hearing these bizarre stories that civil servants in the Home Office plan to erect tent cities in London parks in which to accommodate our migrants. We know now the government is planning to offer landlords fantastic sweet deals to put up migrants for the next 5 years. They're being guaranteed rent, guaranteed their all of their bills being paid, their council tax being paid. Really good, sweet deals to put these... In other words, this is the language of capitulation. It is not the language of a government that really is intent on solving this crisis. So we've got Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, who I think is going to, if anyone, may be able to do a decent job with this, but she's got an imperative right now to get cracking. So does Rishi Sunak. Same old question, James, what can the government do to solve this absolute omnishambles of a crisis?
Well, it's got worse because they haven't done anything for such a long time. And it's not just this government, it's successive governments. I mean, it's like everything else. The crisis develops into a crisis that's out of control because measures aren't taking place. It's not just on this, it's on the NHS, it's on education, it's on the economy. But this has been building up for some time, and it's actually causing more division. It's causing more resentment. And people are not just confused about the government's immigration or lack of policy, they're now fed up with it because nothing's being done. There's a lot of empty rhetoric that's been building up for years and years, and nothing is getting solved. We recognise a lot of the benefits of economic migration, but what we don't want is basically a process that doesn't even exist. You know, there's not a verification process. There's not a process in terms of working with businesses and communities to make sure that migrants are starting straight away with the right infrastructures around them. And what happens is we have a mounting crisis in the Channel. We've been talking about this, me and you, Kevin, for a year, 18 months, and nothing's being done. And so Braverman might be talking tougher, but it's not about a tougher policy. It's about having the right policy. And words are nothing. Because I've heard all this before from Home Secretaries, but we haven't had any action for such a long time, and it's breeding more resentment. And we've got to give our time to get this right. But based on the track record of previous Home Secretaries, I don't hold any good faith in terms of her ability, based on the track record of previous Home Secretaries, to get any of this right.
Yeah, and what we don't want is a repeat of the Priti Patel show, where she spent 3 years, talking the talk, talking tough, but never walking the walk. Nothing actually ever happened. And here we are now. The migrant crisis is worse than ever. I mean, nearly 1,000 came across yesterday. Nothing seems to be done. We've got to come up with some kind of game plan to deal with this and not take 8 years to process their applications for asylum. By the way, James, we know that a high proportion of these people are young Albanian men, as many as 8 out of 10. Even conservative estimates put it at 6 out of 10. So if we could solve the Albanian situation in terms of the fact there is no war, there is no torture in Albania, there is no war and torture in France, which is from where they come from, and then they say, oh, well, yeah, no, I'm not fleeing torture, I'm a victim of modern slavery. No, you're not. You just spent £5,000 to get across the Channel. Last time I looked, slaves don't have £5,000. So everything these people say is quite clearly a lie. Why can't we just say, sorry, you're from Albania, we're flying you straight home? If we can solve the Albanian aspect of this, we're halfway there.
Yeah, but it's about having a process. You know, this has been going on not just from an Albanian point of view, but in terms of migration and lack of process for decades now. It's successive governments. It's like the governments don't want to address the issue because they're worried about upsetting particular tribes of potential supporters on one side or the other of the debate. We need to have governments that actually take some action, not just on this issue, but on many other issues as well. You know, I've mentioned education, I've mentioned NHS. You know, the NHS is a perfect example. We're now getting reports of yet another NHS crisis this winter because none of the problems are being solved. We have like a Mobius loop of problems on an issue-by-issue basis. The successive governments never seem to solve the problem. It's all empty rhetoric. It's all literally putting an elastoplast over a serious problem. And then the wounds open up again. We've got a bigger problem because the solutions that the government come up with are piecemeal at best. They're not long-term. And the immigration aspect and the channel thing, from a humanitarian point of view, no one is winning from this. It's an absolute disaster and it's getting worse. I feel incredibly sorry for anyone who's basically put themselves in a position where they feel that the only way they can better themselves is to cross dangerous channel and boat to get a better life in the UK. And I have a lot of sympathy for that predicament, but we've got to have the infrastructure in place that if they do come into this country, there's a process in terms of working out what happens to them, who they are, the registration processes, but we've not had any of this for decades. And I understand, therefore, why there's a lot of confusion and a lot of resentment around the country, especially in a cost of living crisis, about yet another crisis that has happened on the watch of the government and previous governments that literally haven't done anything. There's too many examples of government literally governing for the sake of governing, but not actually putting any proper integrated plans in place that are not just short-term solutions, but are actually going to be beneficial in the long term.
And they've got to do something about this because it's out of control. A couple of words on your thoughts. The Home Office civil servants came up with this bizarre plan to erect tent cities in London's parks to accommodate the increasing number of migrants that coming across the Channel. I mean, what on earth is going on in their minds that they're thinking along these lines?
Again, it's just short-termism, Kevin, isn't it? It's a whiff of panic to try and do something, but it's not a solution. And in a lot of ways, it's making the problem worse from everyone's point of view. There has to be, and I mean, there's so many examples. I've mentioned, for instance, NHS and education and also the economy, but also energy. We're in an energy crisis because successive governments haven't put in place an energy supply strategy that will be effective right across the country for households and businesses. It's the same with immigration as well. I think most people recognise the benefits of economic migration, and a lot of industries depend on that. But what isn't correct is what's going on right now, because nothing's been done, and you end up with the example you've just mentioned, where temporary accommodation in tents. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, this
exactly.
is just not. I know it's a perfect nutshell example of why governments are not getting on top of important issues, of which one of them is immigration.
Unless we forget, James, I was on Twitter this morning getting attacked by these left-wing liberals. I was just saying, oh, it's great that they're all coming over, give them an opportunity, improve their lives. I mean, lest we forget, above and beyond the politics of all of this, every time these people step into a dinghy and they try to cross the Channel, they're putting their lives at risk. They're putting themselves in mortal danger. Was it last November? I think pretty much a year ago. Was it 29 of them drowned? You know, this is an issue. This is a life or death issue. That's why we've got to stop them, if nothing else, to stop themselves putting their lives in danger.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, whenever we sort of question any of this stuff, we're accused of being far right or bigots. Far from it. What we're saying here right now today, Kevin, is a humanitarian aspect, because we're worried about people's lives being put at risk. In the same way as the COVID response became about, oh, yeah, you're not saving Granny, or somehow you must be far right because basically you've got question marks about lockdown. And actually our concerns about that was going to create a bigger problem with, for instance, the economy or excess deaths and other ways. And that's all happened. The same thing's happening on immigration. What we're wanting is to try and find balanced solutions whereby migrants prosper in this country with the right infrastructures. And certainly try and take out the horrific zero-sum game that a lot of them are going through right now with a channel crossing and a huge loss of life. That cannot be a good thing. And the government are responsible for this because they've got to come up with effective solutions.
Absolutely. Now, moving on, I mean, you're quite right. If Rishi and Suella Braverman cannot come up with a way to solve this crisis, that will be an electoral disaster for them right off the bat. Other aspects will be as well, probably. But interestingly, stories today emerging of the utter chaos of Liz Truss's brief reign at the top. Where apparently she sat around in number 10 obsessing on wind direction because she thought that Putin might drop a nuclear bomb, and if the prevailing breezes brought the radioactive content over to this country, we'd all die, so she was obsessed with that. I mean, it's quite right the Prime Minister should worry about that thing, but there's something kind of strange and sort of weird about all of that. And then we find out, obviously not necessarily her fault, but the Russians hacked her phone, because there's this strange story about 3 or 4 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago when she was still in charge, where government ministers were going around, why does she keep changing her phone number? We can't get hold of her. Now we know. The Russians hacked her phone, and that put national secrets at risk. Boris Johnson elected not to tell anyone about this because she was still Foreign Secretary at the time. And now we've got Suella Braverman, called Leaky Sue, accused of, putting secrets at risk by sending emails to the wrong people. I don't think she'll lose her job over it in a month of Sundays. However, it does sort of project an image of complete chaos. And now we learn today, James, from polls, that Rishi has come in, and I think the people of this country are so relieved that they've got a safe pair of hands at the helm, that he has now got this Rishi bounce, and in actual fact, he's gaining a lot of ground on the Tories in the polls.
Yeah, I mean, Truss didn't have the bounce. It just collapsed. I mean, there was no honeymoon period at all there. It was just a 4-week nightmare. Sunak, it's very early days, and I wasn't particularly keen about how he became Prime Minister. I think it was an affront to democracy.
Agree.
That's in the past. And I think some of Sunak's methodology and implementation as Chancellor has helped to cultivate a lot of the economic crisis. In particular, I've mentioned before the quantitative easing and the increase in national insurance. But the early optics appear to be quite good. I mean, politics in a lot of ways is sadly style of a substance. At some point, he has to come up with a substance. But do you know what? With COP, I was pleasantly heartened that he's decided not to attend that. I mean, based on Glasgow, it was largely a talking shop on a very important issue, but still a talking shop, which they flew in on private jets and motorcades, and effectively being hypocritical by the very nature of their travel and achieving nothing. And Sunak basically saying that his delegates and officials can look after business while he's focusing on the prioritisation of the thing that will either decide one way or the other whether he gets elected or not, his ability to solve the cost of living crisis. So far, in stature, he is light years ahead of Liz Truss, but it is very early days. And actually, there's another thing about the polls narrowing. It also shows how fragile the support base is for Labour.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not a solid support. I mean, the whole battleground will be around the northern heartlands and the Red Wall, and whether the Tories can cling on to them or whether Labour win them back. But I do think Labour have had a problem for a very long time now, that they have lost their identity with the old deindustrialised communities. It happened in Scotland after the referendum for independence in 2014. They never got that back. The SNP hoovered them up. It then happened gradually with the north of England of successive elections, in particular what happened the last election where Boris hoovered them up because he was getting Brexit done. And I'm still not convinced that vote will fly back to Labour. I think the next election is still all up for grabs. The polls are very volatile at the moment. But fundamentally, the ball is in Sunak's court, and he will be judged on whether he turns around the economy or not in the next 2 years. If he doesn't, he will lose. If he does, he has a fair chance of winning. But I don't think people are buying in to the model of opposition that Starmer and his fellow frontbenchers are showing at the moment.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is for the past few weeks during Truss's debacle, Keir Starmer was wise enough to follow that maxim, when your enemy's making mistakes, don't interrupt. However, his enemy now, arguably, is not making mistakes. So now Keir Starmer is on the rack. And again, ironically, I think the nation was so disarmed by Liz Truss the chaos of trust, along comes safe pair of hands Rishi, and we are all heaving a sigh of national relief, and it's playing well for Rishi. People are going, thank God for Mr. Sunak, a safe pair of hands. Yes, he's got my backing. It's kind of working for him.
It's early days. I mean, I think there's two aspects to the decline of support for the Tories previously. It was obviously Truss, who's out of her depth, but also Johnson and Partygate. I think that was the main thing. That was a huge affront to millions of people who are doing their bit, whether they agreed with it or not, over lockdowns, and they were all sort of gallivanting around, clinking glasses during lockdowns down Whitehall, having parties. So the Tories have been sliding for a while. But I do think Labour have got a problem because I think it's a soft support. And paradoxically, and it's a terrible situation for Labour in a way, paradoxically, it's out of their control. Because if the economy bounces back, then the Tories have got a chance of winning. That's not good, obviously, for Starmer. So therefore, the only way he can win is if the economy stays bad.
Yeah,
I mean,
hold these thoughts, James. We're going to have to go to break now. I was just thinking, I can't believe that this time last week, you and I were discussing the return of Boris. I mean, if nothing else, things are moving incredibly quickly in Westminster at the moment.
We're terrible at tipping, Kevin.
Yeah, we certainly are. So stay where we are, James, and we'll resume this conversation after these messages. I'm with James Melville, political and social commentator. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. I'm still talking to social commentator James Melville. James, we were talking about the Rishi bounce. The lead of Labour has been slashed from 27 points to 16 points in a week, so a significant reduction there. As you say, Keir Starmer won't be sleeping well about all of this. But one of the decisions he made, which of course all the lefties are going, ooh, it's horrible, we all hate it, everyone will hate him for this, and that was to announce that he won't be attending COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So this, of course, is after COP26 in Glasgow, that obscene festival of private jets, billionaires arriving in their gas-guzzling massive cars and jets, and world leaders like Joe Biden charging around in a grotesque 85-car motorcade. I mean, it was a disgusting, polluting, ludicrous gathering of the great and the good achieving nothing. So he's announced he's not going. So, don't care about climate change. Well, the way I would see it, I put this on Twitter yesterday, is presumably Rishi is thinking, so hang on a second, so the climate change crisis, we're told now, is more critical than ever. We have never been in a worse state in terms of climate change and the disasters that that brings. And that is after 26 COPs, one a year, 26. Like the nonsense we saw last year in Glasgow. 26 of them. So what have these people achieved? They've achieved nothing. The situation's got worse. These COPs are a waste of time. They're not much COP, are they?
Some of them have achieved a lot. They've had a lot of good parties and selfies at various... I mean, I was down in Cornwall. I can't remember if it was the G20 or the G7. I think it's G7 that was down in Cornwall. And... part of that whole St Ives Carbis Bay area was closed off. There was a sort of ring of steel around, and there wasn't much social distancing going on there. It was during that time. There's a lot of mandates in place from a lot of the countries, and the representatives are there. And the same thing at COP, with the thrown-in hypocrisy of private jets and motorcades and so on. And fundamentally, they finished it by saying, well, we've achieved great things, an historic moment. But fundamentally, nothing really of substance was achieved. And I suspect it might be the same thing in Egypt. And Sunak, he can get his officials out there, and if there's some negotiation, they'll be able to do that. And if something is achieved, he can trot across and attend the phone calls at the end. But I think a lot of the public are in agreement with him. His prioritisation is the economic crisis in the UK right now, and he's got a lot of work over the next 2 or 3 weeks over the economic plans, which have been delayed and will be announced in a couple of weeks. Whether he's at COP or not is irrelevant, because it's about, for the leaders, largely meet and greets, photocalls, and signing things at the end. And the leaders will go to this big jamboree, and they'll all stand there, and they'll all look smug, and they'll all be looking as if they're slightly more highfalutin than everyone else. But fundamentally, what's going to be achieved? And if Sunak, it doesn't mean that he's against the whole aspect of the campaign on climate change by not being there. What it does mean is pretty much what he said. He feels right now he's got a prioritisation to try and get through the cost of living crisis over the winter. So therefore, most people really shouldn't have a problem with that. But of course, they will. People in particular sides will pick a fight no matter what he does. But on this one, I think the majority of the public will look at that and think, well, he's doing the right thing.
The truth is, I have my beliefs about the climate change crisis. I think it's overstated. But the fact of the matter is, okay, let's accept that maybe millions of Brits are a bit worried about the situation, but it isn't their priority right now. That's not what they're lying awake at night, worrying and fretting about. They're worried about paying their bills. They're worried about keeping a roof over their heads, feeding their kids, and maybe going on holiday once a year in a big old polluting jet to Spain. This is the truth of the way people think, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think our politicians have lost sight of that. I think they're now being governed sometimes by the loudest influencers on a particular side of the debate on Twitter, rather than actually what the silent majority want. I think the majority of people in this country do actually want the same things. They want to give prospects to themselves and their kids, be able to pay their bills, have a few luxuries, improve in life, have safe streets, good education, good public services generally. That's what they want. That's what most people want. And they expect, by paying their taxes to have governments who can fulfill that. Ideally, I think, smaller government, but more effective governments. And instead, what we've got at the moment is governments who aren't doing enough. That all of the major issues we've got, there's a perfect storm because of government negligence and literally being asleep at the wheel, not just over the last 2 or 3 years, but for decades. And I think the public are sick of that. And if Sunak, although it's only optics at the moment, says, I'm not going to COP, I'm focusing on this major priority for millions of people in the country, well, good on him. But the real proof isn't about opting out of a jamboree in Egypt. The real proof is about what economic plans he puts in place. And we'll find that out, obviously, in the next few weeks.
Absolutely. James, fantastic to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for your time. That was James Melville, social and political commentator. Is Rishi Sunak right not to go to COP27? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. And what can the government do about this escalating migrant crisis? 990 came across yesterday. This morning, a suicide bomber has chucked a petrol bomb into the processing centre, which we're told is now so crowded it's teeming with diphtheria. So these people are turning up with diseases, spreading it to each other. The place is packed, utter chaos. You've got residents in Dover are now arming themselves, keeping sledgehammers under their beds because they're worried about these Albanians coming across. A lady in Dover walked into her kitchen last week and found an Albanian standing there. He said he was just wanted to phone his mum. Believe that and you'll believe anything. So it's out of control. What are we going to do about it? What do you think we should do about it? 0344 499 1000. Let me know. Get involved in the conversation. If you prefer, you can text us, write talk at the beginning of your message and send it to 87222, or you can tweet us at talkTV. And now over to my next guest who's been waiting patiently in the studio. Very nice of her to actually come in. It's political and social commentator Reem Ibrahim. Hello, Reem.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm all right. Now, I want to talk to you about the migrant crisis. You heard the details, what's going on today. It's getting really, really worrying. But before we go into the details of that, let's talk about the woman who's in charge of sorting this situation out. That's the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Labour jumping up and down saying she must be fired because she sent some email to the wrong place or something like that. I don't believe she's going anywhere, do you?
No, I don't. I think that, the job of the Home Secretary is always seen as a bit of a poison chalice. It might have been a tactical move by Rishi Sunak to reappoint her as Home Secretary. I think it means that she's probably not going to be a threat in the future to his premiership. But again, I think that she's shown that she's a pretty competent minister, and that sending an email to a member of Parliament, yes, that was a breach of the ministerial code, but she apologised, she resigned. Let's just move on and get on with the crisis that is clearly just getting completely out of hand.
Yeah, and I think she's the right type of person to deal with the migrant crisis because, of course, the reason that she quit the government, where she quit, was allegedly forced to resign because of her security breaches, breaching the ministerial code. I don't believe that for a second. It's because she had a massive blazing row with Liz Truss over the fact that Liz Truss was getting weak on immigration. Said, I want legal people to come in. Liz was apparently furious because Suella Braverman had the temerity to go to the Indian embassy and tell the ambassadors, you people, the Indians, are the worst visa abusers in the world and you've got to do something about it. Liz wanted to do some trade deal with the Indians, so she was saying, let them all in. Suella not having any of that. She wants a massive reduction on legal immigration, which, by the way, I have no problem with at all. My problem is illegal immigration, illegal migration, and she's got plans there as well. So I think she's the right person.
I think you're quite right. I think there's this distinction between illegal and legal migration. I mean, in terms of our legal migration, in terms of sort of economic migrants, if you've got the job qualifications and you've got the sort of qualifications to enter the country, we've actually got a pretty liberal immigration system. So if you go through those safe legal routes, the legal routes that we have at the moment, they're actually pretty liberal. They're not very restrictive at all. When we're thinking about those low-skilled migrants, again, if you're able to get that job, you can get those 70 points required in order for you to migrate over to the United Kingdom. Now, my primary issue with illegal migrants is that they are being put up in hotels, given those 3 meals a day. And, we at the moment have thousands of people homeless all across the country, and yet our taxpayer money is being funded and being put into these hotels to put up these people. Now we're being told about these tents being put up in London potentially by councils. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, this is my theory only, of course, pure speculation on my part. Call me cynical. I'd say these civil servants at the Home Office who proposed the tent cities are left-wingers, Labour supporters, and they thought if we can get tents up in Hyde Park and put the migrants in it, A, it'll make life horrible for the rich people who live there, and we hate rich people, and B, it'll look really bad for the evil Tory government. That's what that's about.
Probably, and we know the majority of the civil service find it quite difficult to put away their left-wing political views, to turn up to work in the first place, but also to put away their left-wing views. I think that, so I'm actually pretty pro-immigration. I think that immigration is good for the country, it's good for the economy, and it drives up standards. What I don't think is right is that illegal migrants come over and leech off of the taxpayer at the moment. We're all paying this taxpayer money. We're hoping that it goes to our NHS. The NHS is a separate issue, but we're hoping it goes to our schools, to our education system, to our welfare system. We're all struggling here, and instead our taxpayer money is being funded in order to put up these people that actually we don't know where they've come from, we don't know their criminal records, we don't know who they are, what they want, or whether or not they actually will come here and work themselves and contribute to the system. I
think what a lot of people are worried about, and here's one of Boris Johnson's problems, he never got his head around the fact that this is a major issue. He never understood how much this means to millions of Brits, because he's a metropolitan elite type, just shrugged his shoulders, well, it's only a few hundred a day, that sort of thing. Yeah. He couldn't conceive of how important this is. So if Rishi Sunak at least understands that, it's good news. But we learned this week that the government, through the prism of that Serco company, which has got a £1.4 billion contract to deal with migrants when they get here, that they are offering landlords, homeowners, these amazingly sweet deals. We'll pay you'll pay your council tax, you'll pay all your bills, you'll get guaranteed rent whether you've got tenants or not for 5 years to put up migrants. Now, this is not this is an assimilation of the escalation of this crisis. It is the language of capitulation. We can't really solve this, so we've just got to find more places to put them. That's not what people want to hear. We want to hear how we'll require less accommodation because there are fewer migrants coming here. They've got to stop this.
Of course, and now it's really, really getting out of hand. And my primary issue is that we're sort of talking about the government and Serco putting this money in to help people house these migrants. It's actually our money. It's the taxpayers' money that's going into these contracts, and that's my primary issue here. I have no issue with migrants coming over and actually working for themselves and, paying for themselves. But the majority of cases, they don't. They want to, they come over because of our very generous welfare state, very generous welfare system where they get all of these benefits. Why wouldn't you come over from France where you don't get anything to over here where they're jumping ship from France over to the United Kingdom because you get 3 meals a day, you get put up in a hotel or a tent maybe in London or in a nice landlord's home. You get all of this stuff that's paid for by the taxpayer. We've got millions of hardworking British people in this country that aren't getting any of these benefits.
Yeah. I'd like to ask all these French people who think that France is the greatest country on the face of the earth why they think that migrants don't agree with them, because they can't wait to get out of France. They all want to come here. Can't stand Calais or France. So what's going on there? Reem will pick up this conversation after these messages. I'm with Reem Ibrahim, political commentator. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. I'm still with political commentator Reem Ibrahim. Reem, your thoughts on the Rishi bounce? I was just saying to James Melville before you came on that actually, sort of almost counterintuitively, the chaos, the disaster of Liz Truss, and we're finding out extraordinary details today, you know, sitting in a room doing a nut about prevailing winds in case Putin dropped a nuclear bomb and we got radioactive material blowing our way. You know, she had her phone hacked, you know, she became paranoid. I mean, you know, and apparently her actual office was just a catastrophe. So the whole place was a dysfunctional mess with a woman who was obviously losing her marbles at the top. So we're finding out more and more harrowing details of what it was like in Number 10 during her brief regime. And ironically, I think that's playing really well for Rishi, because the relief that now Rishi is at the helm is almost palpable, and it's playing well in the polls. He's really catching up with Labour.
He is, and he's managed to slash the Labour lead just down to 16 points, so it's a huge amount just in the space of 1 week. Yeah. I think it's really good look for the Conservatives, you know, looking towards the next election in just under 2 years now. But again, I think that Sunak is this continuation of the sort of Johnsonite economics, that sort of welfare, you know, huge amounts of spending, huge amounts of taxes, and it's just this continuation. Clearly the polls are liking it. Clearly the market is sort of, okay, things are a little bit more stable now. The pound has been able to stabilise as well. But again, I think that these new stories about Liz Truss have sort of made her 44 days, was it, in Number 10, seem like it was a complete and utter car wreck, more so than it was already after she had resigned.
Yeah, and I don't know whether she was harbouring any ambitions to get back to the political front line, but her political career is over, isn't it?
No, it is. I mean, we had the news about her under Boris Johnson whilst he was still Prime Minister, the news about her phone being hacked by the Kremlin. I mean, this is just crazy news. We're hearing all these stories about Truss and her sort of complete incompetence. And again, this is sort of just reaffirming what we already knew about her during her premiership. I mean, I'll hold my hands up. I did vote for her in the leadership election. I did support her because I thought that she had those free market principles. It turned out to be that she just completely U-turned almost every supply side reform that she put forward.
Free market principles that she ditched at the drop of a hat. And that was why Suella Braverman fell out with her. She said, you're just going back on everything you said. And I'm the same as you, Reem. I'm not a member of the Tory party, never would be either. But I thought she sounded good. I supported Liz Truss because she talks a great game. But it was a bit, looking back on it was a bit like Jeremy Corbyn. Do you remember when he was campaigning to be Prime Minister, that election against Boris Johnson, when, you know, the more they fell behind in the polls, the more he said, free Wi-Fi!
They're going to win.
Yeah. Free air travel! I'll give you £1 million! You know, just saying anything. So Liz Truss was a bit like that. And her big problem was she didn't prepare the way. I still think the mini budget was a good idea, but you can't just drop it like a nuclear bomb, if I can use that analogy.
And I think you're absolutely right. It was she dropped it and then ran away. Both her and Kwasi, they did not explain why they were doing these tax cuts. I mean, you know, thinking about these smaller businesses, those that own small businesses know how difficult it's been in the past 2 years during the cost of living crisis, but also just coming out of COVID. A lot of those businesses were expecting that reversal in the 6% corporation tax rise. They were expecting that reversal. They're expecting that bit of extra cash in order for them to bring forward. And again, this is their money. They've earned it. They've been able to make it. And it's this huge issue with government where they just decide to take more of it. Again, Sunak has been able to sort of come out of that and say, you know, I told you so. I was right all along. But I actually think that Truss had the right idea, but the wrong sort of priorities, and wasn't able to explain it properly to the public.
Yeah, and the banks and the money markets. I mean, what's quite depressing about this is the reason that Rishi looks like a safe pair of hands is, of course, he really does understand the money markets. Everybody drones on about, he's married into money. His wife's worth 500 million. Well, he made himself
very wealthy,
you know, many millions of pounds, pretty 100 million quid. He made that himself, self-made on the markets, working in the city. So he's not just someone who married into wealth, so he understands the markets. But what's kind of quite depressing, if you think about it, is the reason the ship is steadying is because Rishi's doing things that the money markets approve of. So in other words, what we've discovered is prime ministers have to do what they're told by the money markets.
That's absolutely right, and I think that the issue with Truss is that she wanted the best of both worlds. She wasn't really into this sort of balancing of the books that I think that Sunak is getting right. She wanted the tax cuts because that's politically popular, but she unequivocally refused to cut spending, and she refused to have an published ABR forecast before publishing the mini budget, which essentially meant that this money was coming from nowhere, coming through borrowing. Of course, that was going to spook the markets. Now Sunak sort of has the right idea about balancing the books, but my worry is that he won't prioritise these tax cuts in the future, and we won't see that in the long term. Yeah,
but yes, don't forget when he was Chancellor before, he presided over an astonishing 15 tax rises, and it was high tax, high spend. In other words, Labour, and that's the problem. So he needs to divest himself of those kind of activities and be a bit more Tory. But we're going to get tax rises. There's no doubt about it. Interesting text we've had here, Reem, from Laura. She says, "I have no problem with legal migrants with jobs to come to. What annoys me is that foreign students are allowed to bring their families, 5 to 6 people with them. They say to help them with their homework. What a joke. UK students leave their family to live in student digs on their own. How can the government be so stupid to allow this to happen?" I'm not familiar with the details of that, but if that's right, if a student gets a visa to study here and can bring 5 to 6 members of their family with them, that's just absurd.
That is absurd. I'm not totally sure that's right. I mean, I'm not
sure that. We'll have to look into that.
Yeah, because I go to LSE, and I think it's about 80% of the students are, international students. A lot of them come with huge amounts of money, from these areas. A lot of them are from Shanghai. A lot of them from areas of Asia where they have huge amounts of money, and they come over and they spend all their money in British businesses. So that's why I think that kind of migration is good. My issue is with the illegal migrants that come over and try to leech off the taxpayer, people that are already spending money.
To be honest, as I always say, I have no problem with legal migrants. And if they want to put the numbers up of legal migrants, it's nothing to do with me, fine. I don't know how these things work. But if you're legal, come. Not big deal, great. If you're illegal, don't just say, "Oh, well, you've arrived, so you can stay here for 8 years while we process your..."
And they get lost in the system, don't they?
They get lost. I mean, this whole idea, they go, "Oh, well, what happens is when they land on the beaches, we put them in hotels." Yeah, we do. Hotels from which they're free to walk out.
Yeah. Absolutely, and then again, this is paid for by the taxpayer, right? So this is why I think we've got to distinguish between legal and illegal migrants. If we want to talk about legal safe routes for refugees, that's a slightly different issue. But I think, again, a lot of these people will pose as refugees. I mean, Albania is a safe country. This is ridiculous. The fact that we're even labelling these people as refugees is crazy.
Let me get you on that. You see, that's what I said to James Melville earlier. The way I see it, it may be... half of all these migrants are coming across in dinghies are Albanian. Some say, including the Home Secretary Suella Braverman about 3 weeks ago in a newspaper interview, that number is as many as 8 in every 10. 80% are Albanians. So Albanians, by definition, are not fleeing war and torture, either in Albania or in France, because there isn't any in either country. And then they arrive here and say, "Oh, we're victims of modern slavery." No, you're not. You just spent 10,000 quid getting across the channel. So in other words, I would say, if you're from Albania, sorry, right off the bat, you're going home.
Yeah, and a lot of these people...
And then you've solved a great slice of the migrant problem.
But again, Kevin, this is the issue, because when we're telling them to go back, we're going to be putting them in British planes that are paid for by the taxpayer. Again, this is our money that is going through to
a small price to pay.
Well, we say that it's a small price, but these are, how many of these numbers are coming now, and we've got to send them back. My issue is also these are young men that are clearly able to work. Why are we paying for them? This is our money that we're paying for.
So, and it's, as many, they say about 84% of them, 85% 25% of them are young men. This is all the migrants, not just the Albanians, are young men between the age of 18 and 34.
They're
work. Economic migrants,
They can work.
Yeah.
I think we should send them to work, and if they refuse to work, kick them out.
Well, but if you send them to work, then they've really got their feet under the carpet, haven't they?
I don't necessarily...
Is that an expression? I just made that
I
up?
think you've made it up, but I like it.
What is the expression I was looking for? Feet under the carpet. What is it? Anyway, never mind.
They're in the country and they're working. You know what? I'd rather, this is an issue with illegal migrants, is that we can't let them think that they'll get away with it. But again, I'd rather, whilst they're having their refugee status process, I'd rather them pay their own way and work than be paid for by the taxpayer.
Yeah, maybe something in what you say. I just feel that again, that's the language of capitulation. Just send them home. As soon as they get here. You're from Albania. There's the plane. It's going back to the capital of Albania, whatever that's called. I'm sure I should know that, but I don't. I've got all over the place today. Let's quickly talk about education. Proposal this week that... we should reduce the school week from 5 days to 4. I thought, again, it's a bit like the proposal for civil servants. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's put tents up in Hyde Park for the migrant. Yeah, great idea. Now it's like, let's reduce the school working week, as it were, the school learning week from 5 days to 4 days. So, okay, so our education system is pretty catastrophic already.
It is.
Kids are coming out of school not knowing how to use basic language, don't know about punctuations, can't add up. So their education is bad enough as it is. So reducing it by 1 day, what is that, 20%? 25%. That's not a good idea, is it? And by the way, if they don't go to school, say on a Friday, what about the parents who are at work?
Yeah.
It's mad.
Of course it's mad. I think so. Education is something I'm really passionate about. I teach the 11 plus part-time.
You're still in your education.
I am still in education, but also when we're thinking about primary and secondary education, so I teach the 11 plus, and last year I taught the year 5s. A lot of them got to the stage of year 5. They've been through 2 successive lockdowns. Being at home, a lot of their parents were working. They weren't able to sit with them and do their homework with them. Some of them were in year 5. These are supposed to be the best and brightest taking the 11 plus exam. Some of them were in year 5 and they had never seen fractions before. They'd never seen basic numeracy before. It's just crazy. We've been through 2 successive lockdowns and now we're being told by civil servants they're going to have to go to school 4 days a week. This proposal is ridiculous in my view. And they're talking about, okay, it's a result of lack of funding. We cannot keep throwing money at these systems that just don't work. We need reform. A lot of our education system is incredibly difficult to handle. We've got academies and we're sort of, using, I guess, band-aid over these different issues around the education system. We've proposed academies. We've, put a ban on new grammar schools. We've got all these different issues here and a lack of allocation of funding. Actually, we just to sit down and see where is this money going? Where are these teachers? How much are they being paid? What days are they actually working? And actually getting our children into school. We've already had 2 lockdowns. We don't need another lack of lockdowns and another 4 days.
Yeah, I totally agree. These, we have to ask, we are not teaching our kids properly. We're not giving them a decent education. When I was a newspaper executive a while ago now, but we used to get kids on work experience and, they would come from Oxford. They would be in the second year of Oxford or Cambridge University. They couldn't spell, didn't know how to use commas or full stops. And these are at the best universities in the country, in the world, apparently. I mean, what's happening?
I think a lot of it, so I don't know how long ago that was, but the lockdowns...
Not that long ago.
Not that long ago, okay. Well, the lockdowns had a huge impact on
way pre... we're talking 10 years ago,
I think that there's obviously been a long-term decline in our education system in terms of the quality of care. And, we know that the class size has gotten bigger and bigger. This is partly as a result of increased migration, especially around areas of London. But when we're thinking about outside of London, the quality of education, the funding, the way it's been allocated, it's just not reaching those areas. Lockdown just, was a complete slap in the face to the education system. You had children, especially those children with special educational needs that need that special learning. They just were not able to receive that. And again, they were being forced to be at home, sometimes on their iPads or on their phones. They're just not learning that way. And I think that we have a huge, we've got to keep our politicians accountable. They have a lot to tell us about when it comes to education. We have to sort of think about this new generation of children that are going into secondary school, not having never seen a fraction before. It's ridiculous.
I know, it is ridiculous. Just reminding me, I should really have talked about the NHS today, which of course is in crisis, but it's always in crisis.
Yes.
And frankly, I'm bored with the NHS crisis, but we will talk about that later in the show. Reem Ibrahim, as political commentator, thank you so much for your time. Why is Britain so left-wing? We'll ask that question after the break. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV live from the Talk Radio studio.
This is Talk TV.
Straight talking, no nonsense, and annoying all the right people. This is Talk TV. Straight talking, no nonsense, and annoying all the right people. This is Talk TV.
Welcome back. This is the second hour of our afternoon spectacular, our Sunday service, right here on Talk TV. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is coming at you from the Talk Radio studios. In a little while, we'll be talking to former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley after some German workers in a Porsche showroom showed us how to deal with eco-zealots when they're doing their demonstrations. It's a great story, and maybe it might be a good idea if we started treating these eco-nuts the same. Also, former Cabinet Minister Anne Widdecombe will be joining me in a little while with an offbeat story, to talk about an offbeat story that I think is worth discussing. It's basically the potential death of the traditional church pew. More and more churches are ripping out their pews, which I think are rather attractive, very traditional. They look great, something churchy about them. They're ripping them out and replacing them with a rather boring sort of municipal stackable chairs that aren't at all attractive. So find out why, and Anne and I think, might lament the end of the church pew. It's an important part of going to worship God, I think, is sitting on a pew with the prayer book next to you and the Bible and all that, you know. So we'll be talking about that. And then at the end of the hour, an amazing crime story about a millionaire businessman who was shot dead on the doorstep of his mansion in one of London's most exclusive streets. It's called the Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead, and he was shot dead on New Year's Day 1985. The murder has never been solved, except his family know who did it, the police know who did it, the police want to prosecute, but the Crown Prosecution Service won't. What's going on? We'll be asking that question towards the end of this hour. Keep your calls coming in. We'll try and get some, definitely get to all of you, I promise. But we'll try and get to some of you as we progress. There's a special slot for you later in the show, but we'll try and fit some of you in as we go along, because we're getting so many today. The migrant crisis, I think, has really got people wound up. And here's another thing that has wound me up. Before we get to those other great stories, I want to talk about this. This is really annoying. 12 years of Tory rule. The Conservatives, right-wingers, right? So we've had Cameron, we've had Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, now Rishi Sunak. So the Conservatives, Labour, the left-wing party, have been in opposition. Why, after a dozen years of right-wing Tory rule, is Britain a much more left-wing nation than when they took over, than when the Tories took over? It's bizarre. I blame the lackadaisical approach of successive prime ministers to the problem of wokery. And I also blame the fact that too many Tory MPs, are just Tories in red tracksuits. I mean, they are socialists. They want high taxes. They want to spend. They go to compassionate conservatism. To Theresa May in the worst speech ever. Ooh, we're perceived as the nasty party. Good. Be the nasty party. Just govern properly like Conservatives. That's half the problem. Too many Tory MPs are not proper Conservatives. Let's speak about this to the chairman of the Mallard, which is a publication, a forum that allows Tory Conservative thinking and debate to go on. That's Jake Scott. Good afternoon, Jake.
Good afternoon, Kevin.
Well, you heard my reasons. That's what I think. I think that Cameron, May and Johnson in particular were asleep at the wheel, shrugging their shoulders about all this nonsensical wokery. The kind of left-wing blob, the mob of them out there, proposing all this absurdity, taking over our educational curricula. God knows what's going on in schools now. We know what's going on in universities. These Tory prime ministers and their MPs did nothing to stop this tide. And I also believe that too many Tory MPs right now aren't proper Conservatives. And they're actually quite left-wing. And they encourage this syndrome we're talking about now. So those are my reasons. Do you concur? Do you have other thoughts about why we've become more left-wing despite 12 years of Tory rule?
Well, I think there's three things really that I would talk about. The first is what you've already brought up, this perception amongst the Conservative Party that they need to stop being seen as the nasty party. But in many cases, being nasty seems to be correlated with doing what's necessary, such as deporting terrorists or policing our borders. It seems to not be kind. But at the end of the day, if we're defining kind on left-wing terms, then we're never going to be kind, because what we believe isn't kind, according to them. Of course, we also seem to think, as a conservative myself, we seem to think, or people seem to think, that we're cruel if we don't allow people to live however they want, whenever they want, when in reality, there are certain things that people do to themselves that are not kind to themselves, such as abusing drugs or taking, hormone blockers or any of these sorts of things that are corrosive to the individual. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you asked the question, are we now a more left-wing nation? I don't necessarily believe that the people at large are left-wing. I think the people at large in this country are fairly right-wing. I think they're commonsensical. I think they believe in the things that conservatives believe. I think they have a conservative disposition. They're in favour of sort of slower managed change. But the second or the third thing, which is kind of a corollary of this, is there's always the question of the people of the nation and then the political nation. And the political nation is the institutions that govern the people. And those institutions have become left-wing. Education is left-wing, the civil service is left-wing, the police is left-wing, the church you mentioned, they're left-wing. Everything has been infiltrated by the left. And this is not absurd academic debate. This is something that was planned and proposed by academic leftists in the 60s and 70s. This is the long march through the institutions. Because if you can capture the institutions of a country, then it doesn't really matter who's in government, which is kind of the point. Brings it back to your point. Even if the Conservatives were right-wing, they wouldn't be able to do anything. And I think it really sums things up when you see two things. First, you see Steve Baker say on BBC that he considers himself a free market leftist. And the second thing is when Priti Patel has been fighting for literally years to police our borders properly, and the civil service has been doing everything it can to prevent her. So for all those reasons, I think it's a complex answer, but it's a complex question. And I think we have a very strong left-wing movement in this country that prevents a sort of natural right-wing movement emerging.
But that, I absolutely agree with everything you said there, Jake. But I still come back to the fact that the reason that the left-wing blob, if you like, has been able to take over all our institutions, take over actually the way that a lot of people think, is because Cameron, May and Johnson were not vigilant enough about it. The Tories are in government. They should have been all over the education system. Why are schools still teaching critical race theory? Why are schools still telling poverty-stricken white kids from council estates, you're privileged? Why didn't the government stop this sort of thing? That's my question to you. Boris Johnson, with the migrant crisis, sovereign borders. He's the man that campaigned for the restoration of our sovereign borders. That's why we're going to leave the EU. Then all these migrants poured across the channel in their thousands, day after day after day. He just shrugged his shoulders. This is the problem. They're all asleep at the wheel.
I do think there's a significant degree of truth in that. When it comes to education, for instance, a lot of things have been snuck in by the back door. So, for example, the Equality Act institutes certain things that educators can't fight against, such as teaching a diverse range of opinions rather than opinions that are actually true versus opinions that are false, such as critical race theory. And the problem as well lies, to a degree, like you say, that the Conservatives have taken their hands off the wheel or been asleep at the wheel, but also the educational reforms that were instituted under Cameron, such as the move towards academies, that's actually been damaging because it means you have increasingly loose curricula across the country, so people can teach in their free schools what they like. We saw this with the emergence of a significant number of Islamist schools in inner city communities, but it's the same thing, but taken to the other end of the spectrum, where you have increasingly loose restrictions on teaching that have become extraordinarily left-wing in terms of teaching, quite radical agendas. Essentially, that's what it is. And Kemi Badenoch was absolutely right a few years ago in Parliament when she said it's a radical agenda designed to divide people. That's what it is.
Yeah.
In terms of why, I don't think the Conservative Party are right wing, even in places where you could see them as right wing. Sorry, go on.
So I was just going to say, some of the MPs, I mean, they're just Labour, they're just socialists, and I think one of the most damaging moments in recent history for the Conservative Party was that absurd speech by Theresa May saying, we'll be perceived as the nasty party. Good. I don't care. Nor do millions of people around the country. Just do your job. Govern us properly. Seal our borders. Deal with law and order. Stop crime. Make the streets safe. Make jobs safe. Allow people to keep a roof over their heads and maybe go on holiday once a year, and by God, get onto a jet and shove some pollution out into the air, because people don't care about that stuff. And yet we have Theresa May saying, we're a nasty party, got to be compassionate Conservatives. I don't think people around the country go, I wish the Conservatives were compassionate. So these Labour MPs for too long have been worried about, they've been trying to assimilate everything that Labour stands for so they can maybe get their votes, meanwhile abandoning the principles that their voters support. So they've been far more obsessed with trying to get Labour onto their side, or Labour voters onto their side, by being compassionate Conservatives, ignoring traditional Conservatives and what they want. It's been a really bad, disastrous time for them, I think.
I completely agree. I think the fact that David Cameron pronounced that he was the heir to Blair summarises the whole problem, right? Those are the two defining moments in the contemporary Conservative crisis, that you had Theresa May, who was then chairman of the Tory party, say, we don't want to be seen as the nasty party. And you had David Cameron say, I'm the heir to Blair. At that point, it's basically a signal to the rest of the country that they were adopting the new Labour agenda, but with a slightly more fiscally conservative approach. And even then, they haven't really been in the last 12 years. Have they been fiscally conservative, apart from quite swinging austerity programme? Apart from that, not really. So, I agree. There's not really any reason to think that the Conservative Party is right-wing anymore. I don't think it believes in even the principled elements of conservatism, standing for the nation, standing up for our traditions and our history and our culture and all the things that make us unique. And none of that is done. And in fact, the few people that do it are sidelined in the party, such as the Cornerstone Group or the Common Sense Group.
Indeed, yeah, they're seen as sort of they're called far right. They're not far right. They're just traditional Conservatives. And this is what I feel about Suella Braverman. I mean, she's getting attacked not only by Labour politicians, but by quite a few Tory politicians as well. And I'll tell you why, Jake. Because she has the temerity to be a proper Conservative. There are too many Conservative MPs who can't stand conservatism.
Again, I completely agree. I think, like I said, the fact that Steve Baker was able to go on BBC and say I'm a free market leftist, what does that even really mean? For one thing, the free market is neither right or left-wing. You tend to find free marketeers are on the right, but you find a lot of left-wing free marketeers, such as Tony Blair, because they see it as a method to alter the economic life of the nation rather than, freeing it as Margaret Thatcher saw. But when you have people in the Conservative Party who don't believe in the traditions and cultures of this country, then you've lost, essentially. Where do we go from here? What do we do if we have a Conservative Party that isn't conservative? And it's like Peter Hitchens says, they're pretending to be conservative, and by virtue of doing so, preventing a proper conservative movement from emerging.
Totally right. Absolutely. Peter Hitchens hitting the hammer on the nail on the head once again. Now, in the next couple of years, just before you go, Jake, obviously looks like Rishi will carry the Tories to the next election. I mean, there's been a Rishi bounce. People see him as a safe pair of hands. The markets are stabilising. And the polls today are revealing a significant reduction in the Labour lead, which is good news. The only thing that worries me, or it's not the only thing, but what does worry me, is that going forward, because of the crisis we're in, he's going to have to hit us with a load more tax rises. He's the Chancellor that hit us with 15 tax rises when he was working for Boris. Now he's going to be the Prime Minister that hits us with even more. That will lead to high spending. So it's going to be high tax, high spending. So we're going to have 2 years of a very competent Prime Minister imposing extremely unconservative policies on us.
I think, again, this kind of comes back to the question, in a way, why have we seen this bounce under Rishi Sunak? It's probably because the people of the country are less ardent right-wingers on the issue of economics than probably the Conservative Party of certain members of the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak is imposing or pursuing a more left-wing agenda on economics than other Conservative leaders, especially Liz Truss, as we've seen in the last month. Whether that makes the British people left-wing is a different question, because you can have a conservative approach, in my opinion, to a state that is prepared to intervene where the economy has essentially gone wrong. And one of the areas where it has gone wrong, and you might disagree with me on this, you might disagree, one of the areas it's gone wrong has been the vast accumulation of wealth, whilst everyone else suffers or does not see as an increased rise in wealth. That's really dangerous, and a Conservative Prime Minister needs to be concerned with dealing with that problem, because it's no longer a question of economics, it's a question of social cohesion. If you have a major gap between the poor and the rich, they won't start to see themselves as part of one nation anymore. So again, this whole one nation Toryism thing, it's not necessarily about governing in the interest of the whole nation. It's about binding the nation together so that they see themselves as one nation. And if the wealthy are so wealthy that they can't even align or identify with the poor, then you're not going to be able to build that one nation.
Yeah, the polarisation of society is a problem that Rishi is going to have to get to grips with. Jake, that was really fascinating. You must come on again. Really good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Jake Scott there, chairman of the Mallard, which is a publication that allows conservative debate to flourish. So have a look at that if you can. When we come back, we'll be talking about eco-zealots, how to deal with them. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. Let's talk now about. We're talking about the left-wing nation. Well, one of the scourges, in my view, that's been allowed to rise and rise is the scourge of these eco-nuts who seem to think that it's their job to disrupt decent people's lives. I don't mind their right to protest. They've got every right to pursue their carbon net zero fantasy dream. It's up to them, I suppose. However, I don't see why they should have the right to disrupt other people's lives. You know, people trying to get sick relatives to hospital, that kind of thing, trying to get their kids to school, trying to do a day's work. You know, why should their right to protest be prioritised over our right to go about our lawful business? Why do the police support them and not us? Why do the police arrest people who try to get these idiots out of the road so they can continue their journey? Political bias, if you ask me. Woke coppers. But over in Germany, at a Porsche showroom, a bunch of them broke in and glued themselves, or they didn't broke in, they walked in, glued themselves to the floor all around these gleaming Porsche cars and, save the world, Just Stop Oil. And by the way, Just Stop Oil, they keep, there they are, they keep spraying orange paint all over, Rolex showrooms. Last time I looked, there's oil in paint. You know, it's just so ridiculous, so hypocritical, so pathetic. But anyway, what they did at this Porsche showroom, the staff, they're all good. Staff went, all right then. So they just turned the lights off, turned off the heating and went home and just left them there. And these protesters started saying, what about our human rights? You've got to give us food. What about toilet facilities? Well, they'd gone home. So then they started complaining that they were freezing. Who cares? Who cares? That's the way to deal with these idiots. Just ignore them. But, of course, you can't ignore them when they're blocking the road. So let's talk to former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley. Hi, Peter.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to see a lot more of what happened in that Porsche showroom in Germany in this country, wouldn't you?
Yes, I will confess to cracking a smile as you were telling that story. Not the first time I'd heard it, but it does raise a chuckle in this household, let me tell you. The part of the difficulties from the police is a High Court ruling, which was laid down some months ago, that said that these protesters have a right to protest, and I don't think anybody's actually arguing with that. They do, and they also said that unless their obstruction of the highway caused significant disruption, then essentially there wasn't much the police could do about it. And we heard the Commissioner a couple of weeks ago when he was talking to the London Assembly saying that they had to speak to their partners like Transport for London and somebody else before they judged whether it was significant. Now, part of being in the police, part of being involved in the criminal justice system is that you create judicial precedents. Every day in the courts, precedents are being set as things that have not previously been encountered are tackled and judges rule upon them. So if I was the Commissioner of the Met, backed by the Met's lawyers, I would be saying we are now going to contest the meaning of the word significant. Because if I ruled the world, I would say one person not being able to get to work is significant. One person not being able to get to a doctor or a hospital appointment is significant. And the Highways Act of 1980 confers the power of arrest to any police constable who they see blocking the road. It's simple.
Exactly. This is when they say, oh, well, the disruption has to be significant. That is a question of interpretation. So the police interpret significant disruption to not be ambulances being blocked, fire engines being blocked. As you quite rightly say, Peter, my view would be as soon as you stop a law-abiding citizen going about his lawful business, trying to get from A to B, as soon as you stop one person, that's significant disruption. And yet the police don't view it that way, and they let these people continue. Just a couple of days ago, there was more of this rather depressing video that we're also familiar with, of these motorists getting out of their car, cars. There was a couple of them, and just trying to haul these idiots, these eco-nuts, off the road. Coppers stepping in and pulling the motorists away and ushering the eco-nuts back to their position where they were blocking the road. The cops have got to change this. They've got to start supporting the law-abiding citizens and stop supporting these idiots who are breaking the damn law.
And let's look on the positive side of things, because credit where it's due, this government has ensured that the punishment for highway obstruction has been increased recently. It used to be a 50 quid fine. You can now get 51 weeks in prison for obstructing the highway. I hope that the courts support this legislation and hand down some significant sentences, because, as you quite rightly point out, the public have just about had enough. And the public are really... We know about trust and confidence in the police being at an all-time low, because, quite frankly, in recent years, it's been more like junkyard and Scotland Yard, and the public are taking matters into their own hands, and they want to see effective, robust, prompt, swift policing.
It's a crisis, Peter, and you and I will no doubt be talking about it once again very soon, because nothing seems to get through to these thick-skulled top cops that's what people want. They don't want you to support the eco-nut demonstrators. They want us. They want you to support us. It's as simple as that. Peter, always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll talk again soon. Peter Blexley there, former top Scotland Yard detective. Let's quickly take a call. Let's go to Tony in Harlow. Hi, Tony.
What you, Kev? You all right?
Yeah, good.
Well, I'll get on. What it is Albania is next to Greece, and it's next to Macedonia, and they're beautiful countries. Greece, everyone goes to Greece in the summer.
Yep.
And they've got a population. It's cheap to live there. It's cheap rent. Population should be 3 million, but it's only 3 people there now, because they're all over here on holiday.
All over here. Yes, we've got about 1 million of them here. No, but to be serious, you're right. The thing about Albania, it is a beautiful country. I haven't been there myself. But it's a safe place to live. Apparently their economy is doing very, very well. So you have to ask yourself, why are so many Albanians leaving Albania, going to France, then coming across here in rubber dinghies? And one of the stories in the papers today is a lot of these people coming over from Albania now have already been refused entry once before. They've come here, they've been chucked out, they've come back. It's a vicious circle, Tony.
Yeah, I know, but what they are letting in is all the barbers, because we've got loads of barber shops.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Well, it's ridiculous. Crazy. I mean, I can't have my hair cut anymore. I've got no hair left now.
Well, the thing is, though, I mean, what do you think we should do about this migrant crisis? I mean, what do you think?
Well, just send them back.
There you go. You know what? It's that easy, isn't it? Just send them back.
It really is.
Just send them back.
It's really easy.
Yeah,
I wonder what Churchill would have done.
I know. Do you know what I was saying? The key phrase here is, where there's a will, there's a way. And we do not have the will to solve this crisis. It's as simple as that. And until we do, we never will. Yeah. Tony, great call. Got to move on. But thank you very much, Tony in Harlow there. Now, we're going to go over to my next guest in just a second. I'll just explain what the story's all about. We're going off-piste. It's a sort of unusual story, but it is a Sunday. It caught my eye, and I think it's well worth talking about. Essentially, we're talking about the death of the church pew. It's only early days yet, but more and more churches, a couple of churches have had to go to their local authorities to actually ask, because they're listed and these are historical items, they've had to go to their local authorities and ask to rip out the church pews and replace them with those sort of rather ugly stackable municipal chairs. So more and more churches are doing this. Now, I think that's sad because the traditional church pew is a rather beautiful piece of furniture, if you ask me, and very evocative. So sad that they're doing this, but there may be some decent reasons behind it. Let's talk to practising Catholic, churchgoer, and of course former Cabinet Minister Anne Widdecombe. Hello, Anne.
Hello.
I've got mixed emotions about this. I don't want to see any church pews coming out of churches because I think they're a beautiful part of the religious pageant, if you were. When you go into a church, the rows and rows of ancient pews, often like dark brown from years of use, interesting graffiti on them, fabulous items that add to the church atmosphere. So I don't want them being pulled out. But, you know, good news, bad news. It turns out that the reason that more and more churches are applying to do this is because more and more people are going to church and they can't fit them in. You can get more people onto these ugly stackable chairs than you can pews. So mixed emotions for you about this?
Well, if that were the principal reason, then I would have mixed emotions because I'm a great pew fan as well. But in fact, there are other reasons. The first is that a lot of churches now, because they don't have the attendance that they once had, and because everything is much more expensive, they tend to let out the churches for secular use. I mean, they're pretty fussy about what the use is, but they'll do it for literary festivals or whatever. And therefore, of course, you can get far more in if you have chairs which you can arrange and rearrange and all the rest of it. So that is the first reason. The second reason, of course, is, and you've touched on it, pews need maintenance. You know, the wood needs treating from time to time. They need regular polishing by that band of very eager ladies that you can find in most churches. So there are reasons other than it's just more people coming to church. I sincerely wish that were the only reason. And if it were, then yes, I would have mixed emotions. But I don't even think I'd say take out all the pews. I would say just put pews round the sides and at the back, etc.
Well, you know me, Anne. I always like to look on the bright side of life. But to be serious, I think it's very sad that church pews are disappearing because, as I said earlier, they are strangely beautiful. They're strangely integral to the church experience. You know, you go in there and they've got the prayer book on the seats and the cushions in front of you. I mean, would you agree that? I mean, if possible, let's try and get churches to keep these lovely items.
Oh, yes, I would. And, you know, every time I hear of a church that's getting rid of its pews, I say, why? Why get rid of the pews? I would certainly back the pew rather than that ghastly, stackable chair that you can see anywhere. And when one church got rid of its pews, I actually ordered a pew. I thought it would be very nice to have. But sadly, that fell through. But I thought it would be a very good idea to buy a pew from a church and to put it either in my hall or to put it out in the garden or do something with a pew. Because I'm as attached to them as you are. But the fact is churches have different reasons for wanting to get rid, and most councils sadly go along with it. Perhaps we could get councillors to take a rather more old-fashioned attitude.
Why do you think, Anne, churches are suffering financially? They're having to rent out their buildings more and more, hence the arrival of these ghastly stackable chairs?
Well, most churches that are old enough to have pews are also old enough to need a huge amount of maintenance. It's not so long ago that there was an enormous spate of lead being stolen from church towers and church roofs and etc. And those things cost a lot of money, and replacing the bells or whatever it might be, they cost huge amounts of money. I mean, you think what you spend just on an ordinary house. You have to do the outside decoration from time to time, and you have to replace tiles on the roof. Well, just look at your average church and think what that costs. And of course, with dwindling congregations, there are fewer people having to pay for more expensive maintenance.
I think it's very sad, though, if financial restraints result in the removal of something that, as I say, is integral to the church experience. But we'll leave that hanging there and hope that most churches do retain their pews, their beautiful pews. And I can't let you go, though, without asking you about the migrant crisis today. Awful events in Dover. A suicide bomber threw a petrol bomb into the migrant processing centre, and possibly even worse, yesterday we learnt that nearly 1,000 came across on 24 boats, 24 dinghies, 990. So once again, I'm afraid it falls upon me and to say, what can the government do to sort out this escalating crisis?
It can do quite a lot. I mean, the first thing is there's supposedly an agreement with the Albanians that we will be able to send back their nationals, and most of the people coming in now are exactly that, they're Albanian. So we should be able to take advantage of that agreement. But secondly, what you really need in all of this, as I'm tired of saying, you need a deterrent. You need a reason for people not to come rather than for a reason for people to come. Now, the reason that they come is that they think Britain is a very easy place in which to disappear, which it is. So they can go into the underground economy. Sorry, I've a terrible cold. They can go into the underground economy and they'll never be sent back. I want to reverse that message. And the message should be you'll always be sent back unless your claim is genuine. And the way to do that is to house all new asylum seekers in secure reception centres, reception centres, so that you can process their claims there and then. You'll be able to get any supplementary information there and then. You don't have to worry about where they are because you know where they are and you can send them back.
That's exactly what I always said. Why don't we detain them instead of putting them in hotels where they can just walk out? Detain them. If the message gets out there to these migrants that when you get to Britain, you won't be welcomed with open arms, you won't be put in a hotel, you'll be put in a detention centre, then the business model of the people smugglers would break. Wish I could talk to you longer about this, Anne, but good luck with the cold. I hope you recover soon. And thank you very much for your time. That's the great Anne Widdecombe, former Tory cabinet minister. When we come back, a true life crime story for you, the murder that was never solved, but they could solve it because they know who did it. Extraordinary. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. By the way, an apology. I've just put my poppy on. I meant to put it on earlier. No one wears the poppy more proudly than I do. And if anyone was watching my show last night, you'll see I had one on throughout those 3 hours last night. Just changed jackets and I forgot. So no disrespect meant. I've got one now. All's well with the world. Now let's move on. Let's talk about an extraordinary crime story. Let's get the guest on, and I'll explain the story. So a warm welcome to crime commentator Danny Shaw. Hello, Danny. I'll run through the story. So a millionaire businessman called Aristos Constantinou was shot dead on the doorstep of his mansion in the Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead, which is one of London's most exclusive streets. In fact, one of the country's most exclusive streets. You won't get a house there for less than about 20 million quid. Anyway, he was shot dead. And officially, the mystery or the murder has never been solved. But his family have been lobbying for ages because they say they know who did it. And also the police concur. They know who did it as well. And as I understand it, the police, certainly the family, are very keen for the Crown Prosecution Service to launch proceedings against this alleged culprit. And so are the police. But the Crown Prosecution won't prosecute. They won't sanction charging this guy. What's going on?
Well, Kevin, this is a very long-running, notorious crime. As you say, goes back to 1985, New Year's Day 1985, when Aristos Constantinou and his wife were returning to their mansion in the Bishop's Avenue after a New Year's Eve party. Mr. Constantinou was shot dead. He was shot 6 times. 6 silver bullets were used. He was shot twice in the head at close range. His wife's account was that she was locked in the bathroom by masked intruders while her husband was attacked. She then managed to break free from the bathroom and raise the alarm. Now, there have been 3 Metropolitan Police investigations into this, the third of which in 2017 apparently came up with evidence to prosecute a suspect. A 43-page dossier was put forward to the Crown Prosecution Service. The initial senior prosecutor who looked at it is believed to have recommended that charges were brought, but that decision was overruled by another senior prosecutor. The family then sought, I think through the police as well, sought a review of that, which they're entitled to do, an internal review by the CPS, and the CPS upheld their decision not to bring charges. So we're left with a situation where the police clearly feel they have a strong case. One CPS prosecutor has said charges should be brought, but that has been overruled by other prosecutors at the CPS. And so at the moment, there seems to be no possibility of a prosecution.
What do we know about Mr. Constantinou, Aristos Constantinou? What kind of business was he involved in? And what's another question, I guess, what's the significance of the silver bullet thing?
Well, in terms of Aristos Constantinou, he was a real rags to riches story. He started up doing in fashion with a sewing machine, making dresses, then going to Carnaby Street and selling them, in a market stall. Eventually, along with his brother, he ran a boutique, and then that spiraled into a huge empire, fashion empire. Areola, I think, is the name of the shops. 11 shops, worldwide business, extremely wealthy. As I say, I mean, I think. I think the latest valuation of the mansion that he owned in Bishop's Avenue in 2015, it was something like £9 million.
Yeah.
Probably that now, Kevin. So extremely wealthy man, self-made millionaire, and also, it should say, very interestingly, very, very stringent security precautions at his home in the Bishop's Avenue. So there have to be some questions around how that security was breached. In terms of the bullets, I think they were very unusual sort of bullets, and a very unusual handgun, it was believed, was used, which I suppose, might take the police in a particular direction in terms of evidence. But clearly, they did make some arrests. I think the first investigation, but the people who were arrested were all released without any charges. But clearly, they believe they've got the evidence. The CPS doesn't, and the CPS, ultimately, is the decision maker in cases like this.
Yeah, but they're quite notorious for making wrong decisions. The CPS is not exactly the most revered organisation on the face of the earth. But I mean, the silver bullet thing, I mean, is there some sort of implication that it's a gangster type thing? I mean, it sounds to me like Aristos Constantinou was a very respectable, hard-working businessman, but normally speaking, hard-working, respectable businessmen do not get assassinated with silver bullets, do they?
Well, I think the account given by his widow was that the intruders were after access to the safe in the house, and they wanted jewellery, money, or valuables. So it was a burglary. In essence, that was the motive. We don't know whether there may have been potentially other business connections, or indeed something in terms of his personal life that was behind it. A lot of those details, I think, probably haven't come out into the open because there hasn't been a court case. In terms of what the family, his surviving brother, now want, they want, I think, the CPS's decision to be either looked at by a High Court judge, so they will bring judicial review proceedings. There's a possibility of a private prosecution, but they are notoriously difficult to mount, extremely costly, no guarantee of success, or they could bring legal action against the person they believe carried this out or was behind it. But again, that's very costly. It has its own risks and so on. So there are some legal options for the family if they want to pursue this. But in terms of the CPS, it looks like they've basically drawn a line under it.
Is there a suspicion that the CPS are doing this because it's such an old case? I mean, what is that, getting on for 40 years ago now, and that they'd rather prioritise, there's a big backlog of legal backlog in the courts, and they don't want to fill up the courts with some ancient case that's nearly half a century old?
Kevin, I've got to be honest, I haven't heard that being suggested, and we've seen a number of old cases recently from the 1980s, 1990s, in which people have been prosecuted. If you think about the Ricky Neve murder, for example, that was in the early 1990s, there's been a successful prosecution of a man for that murder. So I don't think it's about the fact that this is an old case. It's a murder. It's the most, it's the gravest crime possible. I think if the evidence was there, and the CPS felt the evidence was there, they would prosecute. What they probably do not feel is that there is enough evidence, or it's certainly not watertight enough. There isn't a realistic prospect of a conviction, which is the test, for it to go before a jury. I mean, the passage of time is clearly a problem.
Yeah.
Because if there were witnesses who you'd want to call, they may not be alive, or their memories may have faded. And there's clearly probably very unrealistic that you're going to get fresh forensic evidence now so many years later. So obviously the passage of time is a difficulty, but I don't think it's because the CPS is saying, well, we're not going to prioritise this, we're going to prioritise other cases.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone would like to see it solved.
Yeah, fair enough. Point taken. But we wish the family well in their pursuit of justice. Extraordinary case. Danny, great to talk to you as always. That was Danny Shaw, crime commentator. Now, let's go to the phones and take a couple of calls. Let's go to Heathfield in East Sussex and talk to Rod. Hello, Rod.
Hello, Danny.
What would you like to say?
Well, when you were talking about the immigrants, the one weak link of theirs is the method by which they cross the channel, i.e. the boat. So in some way, we've got to be able to destroy all those boats, make them a very valuable commodity, and hit them up where they're made, which I think is places like Turkey and places like that where they turn them out cheaply.
That's an interesting idea. You mean literally make it very difficult for the people smugglers to get hold of the dinghies that ferry these people across? Yeah.
not the immigrants. Well, not yet.
Yeah.
Just damage the boats beyond repair. And then, you know, people keep saying they blame the gangmasters, the organisers. That is the one thing they can't do without. You don't see many immigrants walking across water. They have to wait until they get on a boat.
We saw some pictures not so long ago, the French police sort of puncturing, knifing these dinghies, stabbing the rubber so that they were deflated and couldn't take it to the water. But I think half the problem, I think you're absolutely right, Rod, if only we could get rid of the boats, they'd have no way of crossing. However,
very valuable commodity.
Yeah, the trouble is, but the French, they can't wait to wave goodbye to these migrants, so I don't think there's much mileage in the French stopping them having boats. They don't want to keep them, so they quite like waving goodbye to the migrants, and they become our problem.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, there's your problem. But it's a good idea, Rod, and thank you for your call. That's Rod from Heathfield in East Sussex. Let's go to Southampton and talk to Jenny. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah.
Just one or two things. Why does the government seem to think that, you know, we can throw money at everything? You know, now the new one is throw money at Albania to keep them out when we've got best part of them in anyway.
Right.
So we're going to support that side and this side. Why can't we just change law to make the country work for us, not for other people?
Exactly. Exactly. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Government says they can't leave all this debt to young people. But hang on, what is better, to leave debt to young people? My generation paid for the last war, whatever. So it happens. What are they going to leave? All these murdering
your original point, I think, is brilliant. Why does the law work to the advantage to help the migrants and not to us, who would rather have sovereign borders? Why is that? You're so right. And this is half the problem. I keep saying, my key phrase in all of this, Jenny, is where there's a will, there's a way. So if we had the will to solve the migrant crisis, we would. But we don't have the will.
Kevin, the people have the will. The government's don't.
Yeah, the government don't know. Exactly.
They want to remember this is taxpayers' money. And also, I mean, I know I'm speeding through this, but also people want to remember and think, OK, Tories have let us down badly, big time, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But if they vote Labour, my goodness, this lot ain't going to stop.
If they vote Labour, then they'll be allowed to come, no questions asked.
It'll
get even worse.
Kevin.
It'll get even worse. Jenny, great call. You and me are on the same page. Jenny from Southampton there. Let's go to London, talk to Alex, who is an immigrant. Hello, Alex.
Hi. Yes,
I've got a note here. Alex is an immigrant, a legal one.
A legal one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what's your take on our crisis?
So I am an immigrant. I have immigrated to the UK, and I have settled here legally, right? And what I can say that it has been extremely, extremely difficult, and sometimes you are being treated with contempt. Sometimes you are being treated with suspicion. Like, why do you want to stay in the UK?
Where are you from, Alex? Where are you from?
I'm from Russia.
Okay.
I'm from Russia. So, like, why do you want to stay in the UK? Although, if you do want to stay in the UK legally, you know, it's actually... It shouldn't be a question even.
So what you're saying is, and I think a lot of people would sympathise with what you're saying, that it's much easier, if you want to come to this country, it's much easier to come in illegally on an illegal dinghy and pitch up on the beach and say, let me stay. Then you'll be allowed to stay. It's much easier to do that to try to come legally, right?
Exactly, absolutely. And I have met people who have suggested exploring illegal routes, you know, saying like it's going to be so much easier to just to stay here illegally, you know.
Yeah. No, exactly
like
right.
Claim asylum, for example, you know, easy. Like if you're from Russia,
claim asylum, or say you're a victim of modern slavery, and then it's taking as much as 8 years to process these applications, and mostly, a lot of time, people just disappear. Alex, I'm glad you got to stay. You're very welcome. Good to talk to you. Alex in London there. Much still to come. In a little while, we will be talking about the Royals. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios.
This is Talk TV.
Hi, I'm Aisha Hazarika. There's nothing I like better than a good debate. Come join me on The Talk on Talk TV.
Straight talking, no nonsense, and annoying all the right people. This is Talk TV.
Welcome back. This is the final hour. I mean, I've been calling it our afternoon spectacular, but of course we've gone across the witching hour now. It's now 6:03, so therefore this is the evening section of our show. 60 sizzling minutes still to go. In a little while, we're going to be talking about the migrant crisis with Ben Loughlane. He's from the Bow Group. He's an expert in the field of immigration, so want to get his thoughts on what the hell's going on. Greg Swenson, our friend from across the pond. He'll be in with his Essential American Bulletin. We need to talk about that terrible attack on Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker's husband, at their home in San Francisco. Nancy was in Washington, but Paul Pelosi, her octogenarian husband, was attacked by a maniac with a hammer and had to have emergency surgery for a fractured skull. So, shocking story there. Also, I want to talk to Greg about Elon Musk. Is the bird now free? He's taken over Twitter for $44 billion and is already making drastic changes. He's fired all the top executives and he's changed the way they monitor what's allowed onto Twitter. Talk of him allowing Donald Trump back onto Twitter. Of course, they banned him. And in the interest of free speech, of course, Elon Musk should let the former president back. But seems like the president might not be that keen. He's got his own platform now called Truth, so that may be just a pointless kind of argument. But how much will he change the world's favourite social media site? We'll be taking your calls, lots coming in. So we're going to give you a whole section, folks. So keep your calls coming in. What should we do about the migrant crisis? Climate change? Is Rishi right not to go to the next COP27 jamboree? I think he is, by the way. Why bother? What do they ever achieve? Private jets all over the place, gas-guzzling motorcades. Joe Biden, 85 cars in his motorcade last year at the Glasgow COP26. Loads of private jets flying in, very unenvironmentally friendly, very ungreen. It was a pollution nightmare. Pathetic, isn't it? It's pathetic. And they achieve nothing. Just a load of old words. China don't bother to go. They produce 28% of the world's pollution, and they don't even bother to go. So what is the point? By the way, before we get to our royal section, we've had a text from Jennifer in Suffolk about what to do with the migrants, pitching tents in London parks. She says, lots of Liberal left living in Hampstead, so the Heath would be a most suitable location for a tent city, and I'm sure the locals would welcome its occupants. Yeah, well, Jenny, I live in Hampstead, and it's a no from me. But let's move on. Let's talk about the royal family. Let's go straight to our guest on this subject, Sarah Robertson, a royal commentator. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Good evening to you, Kevin.
Good to have you on board, as always. There's only one subject in town, Bookgate. Harry's book is coming out in January. It's called Spare. Originally, the words seemed to be that the reason the publishers, Random House I think it is, had delayed it because they obviously wanted to catch the Christmas market. Then we heard, oh no, it's been pushed back and therefore won't be published until January. The reason, we thought, was that Harry had wanted to tone it down because he arrived here for the Queen's funeral, saw all his family members and felt a bit guilty about some of the bombshell revelations that he was going to make, and he wanted to tone it down. That was the reason for the delay, we were told. Which would, of course, have made the book a lot more boring. Now we're being told that actually the reason for the delay was the publishers wanted to spice it up. They wanted more bombshell revelations, more sort of dangerous stuff, if you know what I mean. And that's why it's been delayed. So when it comes out in January, Spare could make the royal family go spare.
Yes, I think they are going to go nuclear when this comes out. It says that it's actually far more sexed up and dangerous than what we first thought it was going to be. I mean, we knew that there was going to be some truth bombs in there, but it says that Random House, they've put pressure on Prince Harry. They obviously have to earn this money back that they've shelled out to him in the first place. For this book deal, it needs to be recouped, and people want to get their money's worth when they buy this book. They want to have revelations. They want to hear, about Prince Harry's life growing up. They want to hear royal bombshells and, and cover all these truths, as he puts them. So he's had to sort of sex up this dossier. And what I find quite ironic about this, Kevin, as well, reading between the lines, is that apparently Prince Harry went to ex-girlfriends, the likes of Chelsea Davy, Cressida bonus, asking if they would help and chip in with recollections for the book and if they would be happy to be quoted. I just find this really hypocritical of Prince Harry, a man who has been, guarded his privacy, so to speak, taken his family to California so he could be more private. He always had this blanket ban on any friends, family members, girlfriends ever talking to the press about him. And yet here he is, quite happily going along saying, oh, hi there. Could you just help me with my book, please? As recollections may vary. They've obviously turned down this opportunity. None of them want to be in the media. They've said, no thanks, we want nothing to do with it. But doesn't it just sort of stick really a little bit, in your throat to know that he has not given his family any choice in this matter in terms of privacy. Yet when it comes to him, talking about something, it's fair game as long as he's getting paid for it. It just comes down to what I said last week with you, Kevin. It's all about the money with these two. That's what it's about. It's all about the money. It's show me the dollar, how big is the check, and they'll spill their guts when the price is right for them. But it just really, really just shows rank hypocrisy on Prince Harry's part, all this bleating about privacy and protection. He's even wanting to come to the UK next year in order to promote it. So, what's going to happen then? Who's going to pay for his protection then when he goes on this tour, which he'll be expected to do?
That's extraordinary. And you say how big is the check? It's very big. It's $38 billion, not quite $38 billion, $38 million. Not bad for one book. He's not even writing it himself. But if it's true, Sarah, that the reason for this delay, because, don't forget, publishers, they don't normally publish in January. They go hell for leather to get it ready for the Christmas market. So this delay is very significant. It's been forced upon them because they would have wanted to get it out weeks earlier. However, middle of January it will be. And if it's true that he's sexed it right up, we hear that once again relations between him and William are very frosty. They're not talking again because William's going, God, you're going to write this book after all. And you're right. He goes on about privacy. Clearly doesn't care about the privacy of the royal family. We know he's already dumped on his dad once, said he wouldn't give him any money. He was a tightwad, all of that sort of thing. If he's going to really wade into them, you have to ask the question, it's like, what goes on in this guy's mind? Does he not care about his nearest and dearest? Does he not care about his relatives, his family?
Well, I'm starting to think that maybe Prince Harry's quite disturbed in some respects. I mean, I could never treat my family in that way. I can't understand it. I mean, we've seen, obviously, his wife, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She has no qualms when it comes to discarding family members who are of no longer any use or serve any purpose for her when she decides she doesn't like what they're saying about her. So maybe he's copying from his good lady wife. But it just shows that what he's saying, this bleating on about things, moaning about things, people are just going to get very, very, very sick of it. The other thing as well with this book, what the royals were really, really, really concerned about is what is he going to be saying about Camilla, the Queen Consort. Obviously now his father's the king, Camilla's now stepped up, she's the Queen Consort. There's very, very, very big worries coming from within the palace as to what Prince Harry is going to allude to there, because a big part of this book, Kevin, is going to be all about his mother and the loss of his mother, Princess Diana of Wales, and the impact of his father's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. So that's going to, play a huge part in this book, and this is what's really worrying the palace here. William, there was an olive branch was sent out earlier in the autumn, obviously around the Queen's death. We saw them all come together when they went to look at the flowers together. And there was a feeling that actually there was a thawing between, the two families, the Sussexes and the Cambridges. But, now Harry has gone back hell for leather with this book. That's it. That was his chance. And he's just blowing it, so to speak, because, as I say earlier, he's gone for the money. The money has spoken more than any loyalty afforded to his family or any need to address the situation with them. Maybe he thinks, the King. The King Charles, his father, may be quite forgiving. It's his son, he doesn't want to lose his relationship with his son. Maybe Harry's hoping, to sort of prey on weakness there, and that, a father's love overrides all badness that a child can do and commit. So maybe that's what he's hoping to prey on. But I think there's not going to be any Christmas reconciliation. He's not going to be back for Christmas. We're not going to see him with the family at Christmas time in Sandringham doing those traditions. We're not going to see the Sussexes meeting up with the Cambridges and the Waleses for Christmas. That's just not going to happen. So, yeah, I think, again, ties are cut between them. And now I don't know how this is going to come back. I mean, King Charles was hoping, the titles, using the thought of giving Archie and Lilibet titles for them, might have been a sort of carrot to dangle to get Harry and Meghan to rein this in. But it's not worked. At the end of the day, Random House has got the power here, not the King, and Harry's chosen to go with them.
Yeah, and lest we forget, it's pretty well known that Harry has never liked Camilla. So maybe she should brace herself. Certainly the King is bracing himself. Apart from this, of course, we've still got to endure the documentary series that Harry and Meghan are making for Netflix. That's worth $100 million to them. I mean, it's raking in the cash, but they're selling their nearest and dearest, their loved ones down the river for this. And you just think, what is going on? But as you quite rightly say, Sarah, for a little while, in the slipstream of the Queen's funeral, when Harry and Meghan came over, there was this rapprochement. It looked as if relations were back on an even keel, that Harry had been welcomed back into the family and he was feeling better about them. But no, now, with the news of this book, Spare, the very title is incendiary in itself, relations have never been worse, have they?
Never, not in the history of the royal family. Well, not since, obviously, we saw the abdication of Edward VIII when he gave up the throne to be with Wallis Simpson, his wife, the Duchess of Windsor, who, with the Queen Mother, relations between those two were extremely frosty. But in those days, we didn't hear so much about it. They were both Edwardian ladies from a different time. So one sort of acted with dignity, shall we say, in a modicum of respect, which seems to be lost in today's world, but that's the time that we live in now. But yes, relations now between Harry and Meghan and the royal family are literally at an all-time bottom, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame. I really had hoped that they could have sort of solved things and had this reconciliation, but
It is a real shame, but I was saying earlier in the week on Talk TV, when we heard it had all been toned down and it was all going to be about the trauma, his journey from trauma and grief to recovery, I was saying, oh God, that sounds really boring. Now you're finding out it's not going to be, it's going to be quite a bombshell book. Let's face it, you're right, it is kind of sad, but none of us can wait to read it. So it'll probably be a bonanza for Random House. But as you say, quite sad in terms of the family. Sarah, great to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for your time. Sarah Robertson, royal commentator there. Now let's go to a couple of calls. Let's go to David in Liverpool. Hi, David.
Kev, do you know what I think is going to happen with this migrant thing?
Yeah, about the boats.
I think a group of men from this country, 50, 60 men, will go over there, they'll go to the beach, they'll damage the boats. The police won't do nothing over there. The gangsters over there ain't going to do nothing. And that'll be it. And they'll stop all the boats. I think that's what's going to happen. At some point, that's what's going to happen.
Well, it'll take more than 50 or 60 because the boats turn up night after night after night. We found only yesterday 990 came across in 24 dinghies. So you're going to need more than 50 or 60 people.
Maybe a couple of hundred, but the boat will be there the night previous, and, they'll be sort of hooked up somewhere, And as soon as you find out the system, you just start...
Well, why don't the French do that, David? Why don't the French do that?
because they want them here.
Yeah, exactly right. What you're saying, a lot of people, me included, go, yeah, do it. However, there are international niceties we have to observe. We can't actually send people over to start puncturing these boats because it's French territory. And you're right, the French should be doing this, but the reason they don't is they can't wait to get rid of the migrants.
No, they love it.
Offload them on us.
Them every day.
Yeah.
I do think that at some point, a few hundred men are going to go over there from here. And just like, this government will turn a blind eye from them going over there.
Well, the French, though, you might be right, but it could cause a big international incident. But I think we'd all quite like to see it. We'd all quite like to see it. David, I've got to move on. Thank you for the call, though. Great call. David in Liverpool. Let's go to Audrey in Cockermouth. Hi, Audrey.
Good evening, Kevin.
What can I do for you?
My question is, why hasn't the government investigated the source and supply of the boats to these people smugglers? If there was no boats, there would be no smuggling.
Well, I think a lot of them are manufactured in Turkey. I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate business.
Yes,
the manufacturers can't be held responsible for who buys them.
They've got to travel from Turkey.
Yeah, so but the thing is, it's a legitimate business. The manufacturers can't be held responsible for who buys them.
Of course they can.
No, they can't. Why?
Yes, they should be. They should be able.
Well, the manufacturers probably sell them to showrooms and places like that, and traders and dealers.
I'm sorry, but I think.
What do we do about the manufacturers? I mean, that's their business.
Well, they should stop selling them to the people smugglers.
Yeah, look. I mean, I absolutely sympathise with you, Audrey, and my last caller said exactly the same sort of thing. If we can just stop the boats, destroy the boats, then they've got no way of coming across. But I'm afraid I don't mean to sound condescending, but it is a lot more complicated than if you get rid of the boats, they won't come. They'll come across somehow or other.
They did find a storage of them, and they were destroyed. So why can't they do that on the way?
Well, because more and more will come. They'll get round it. They just will get round it. We need a proper legal framework to stop them. They're going to get here because the French don't care. The French can't wait to say goodbye to them. So they're going to get to Britain. We need a framework by which we can turn them round and send them straight home, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, I still think that they can stop those boats getting to the...
It's a start, Audrey. Absolutely. It's a very good start, but we'll need more than just that. But
I wrote to the Home Office when Priti Patel was in power, and I put this to her, and I just got a load of gobbledygook.
Did you? Well, that figures. Hopefully Suella Braverman will do a better job. Fingers crossed.
I really hope she's strong enough.
I do too. Audrey, I've got to move on, but lovely call. Thank you very much. Please call us again. That's Audrey in Cockermouth there. And next up, we're talking to Ben Lockname from the Bow Group. We're going to revisit the migrant crisis because that's his area of speciality. So much to talk about. Stay tuned. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. polarised politics, all that shit. Welcome back. We are now ready to roll. We've got Ben Loughnane in the studio, and also Greg Swenson, our friend from across the pond, is based here in London. Now, Ben is from the Bow Group, and his specialisation is the migrant crisis. You've seen what's been going on today. I mean, we've got that suicide bomber chucked a petrol bomb into the processing centre, and we learned that 990 came across yesterday in 24 boats. Where are we going?
Still kicking off, isn't it? It's getting quite bad now. It's been pretty bad for the past few years, but it's quite a lot happening in one day. You know, you have that many people coming over, and then the petrol bomb thing. But we don't know who it was who's done it. They haven't released any details.
No, we don't know any details.
It could be
we don't even know if he succeeded in killing himself. We don't know if he injured anybody in there. But it's just, one more incident that adds to a picture of total chaos. It's out of control.
But we've been saying this to the government now for a few years. If you let this carry on, it's going to get to a fever pitch. Things are going to get quite tense. Things are going to blow up, sometimes literally, in the case of the petrol bombs. But I saw a really interesting statistic the other day that something like now 2% of the adult male population of Albania have come across the channel in dinghies over the past few years. 2% of the entire population, adult male population of that country.
About sort of 50, 60 more years, we'll have the entire population of Albania.
If it carries on at this rate, then there'll be no one left in Albania.
See, I've noticed that some of the great and the good are now talking down the Albanian angle. Particularly, Suella Braverman 3 weeks ago said that 8 out of every 10 of these migrants coming across in dinghies were Albanian. They're now trying to say, it's much nearer sort of half. It might even be less than that, which is typical, isn't it? But even if it's half, even if it's 4 in 10, if we can solve the Albanian situation, we've solved a significant proportion of the migrant crisis, haven't we?
Absolutely, and that's something that I don't understand why the government aren't doing more in terms of diplomacy with Albania, saying, hang on a minute, you need to stop this at the source. When these people are leaving the country in the first place, and you know full well what they're doing, they're going off to go to northern France and jump in a dinghy. If you have identified this, what are you doing to stop it? Surely we can work some diplomatic angles to prevent that. And getting rid of the Albanian part of the problem would be a huge development in actually solving this, because they're not legitimate refugees, let's face it, these Albanians. There's no war in Albania, there's no war in France. They're coming over here for one reason.
They're not victims of modern slavery, as they also claim, because they spend about 10,000 quid getting here. Exactly. Now, slaves don't have 10,000 quid. No. So we know, and by the way, about 85% of them are young men between the age of 18 and 34. So clearly economic migrants from a country where there's no war, no torture. They're not victims of modern slavery. So why do we even entertain them? My idea is, you come from Albania? Oh, well, in that case, off you go.
Yeah, we don't need a Rwanda policy. We need an Albanian policy. Put them on a plane and take them back to Albania. We don't need to send them anywhere else. We know where we're coming from. We can send them back there, but why are we not doing this?
So if you're from Albania, you're automatically banned.
Yeah, exactly. It should be a blanket ban if you come from Albania in that way. There's no legitimate reason to do that. And some of them turn around. I was having this argument, a debate with someone, I think from a refugee charity, and he said, well, the thing is, some of them are legitimate because they have blood libels and feuds in their own countries, blood feuds in their own countries, where effectively they've got tensions between them. And it's like, well, then you're importing that into our country. And then he said, oh, well, no, it's fine because some of them, they're just lying about it, so they're not actually importing it. It's like, well, then they're not legitimate. Even the people who are defending these people know that it's not legitimate, and they know it's a farce.
Well, no, I mean, it sounds harsh, and of course, among these Albanians, I'm sure there are one or two cases, a few cases that are very genuine and they deserve asylum and all that. But, in the great scheme of things, they'll just have to be collateral damage. Why don't we just say, it's quite clear what's going on here with Albania. If you're from Albania, no chance.
But even if they are legitimate, refugees, why is it that we have to take them in? There's plenty of countries in between here and Albania where they can go, which are safe. The idea that we have to take in the entire world, we're a small, tiny island nation, but we're a soft touch.
What is it that the migrants don't like about France, but seem to love about Britain? Because, they're in this sort of first world country, France, a very sophisticated, modern country, bit of thriving economy, lovely food, all that, great scenery, good economy. Why don't they want to stay there? Why do they want to come here?
Well, plenty of them do. Plenty of them do stay there, and across the way, a lot of them stop the journey there and get on with it. But I think we are seen as the ultimate destination because we're the softest touch, we're the most benevolent. We put them up in 4-star hotels, we clothe them, feed them. We're not putting them in camps on the beach in shoddy tents and treating them sort of like almost like we want them to leave. We're treating them like we want them to stay.
And we're thinking about all the civil servants at the Home Office, talking of tents. Thought it was a good idea to erect tent cities in places like Hyde Park, all the main parks of London.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
And stick them in there. That's a good idea.
It'd be like Winter Wonderland, wouldn't it?
Yeah, good idea.
Around and have a little look at them.
Yeah. But it's, seriously, this is a plan emanating from the Home Office where, it's quite clear it's full of civil servants who don't want to stop them coming in.
Well, an idea like that, I think, is based more on the fact that they're running out of hotels to put them in. So it's not that they've come up with the idea because it's a good idea, it's because they've got to do something. They can see people continuing to come and the numbers only increasing. And it could get to the point where this year we could have 100,000 Albanians over the channel by the end of the year. And, where are you going to put them all? There's not that many hotels to put them in. At some point, you do have to start thinking about, repurposing other buildings. They came up with another plan, pay people money to put them up in their house, sort of like the Ukrainians. Do you really want an Albanian in your loft?
Well, the point is, did you see the deal? It's via, through the prism of that company Serco, which gets all these government contracts. Yeah. It's got a £1.4 billion contract to administer to the needs of migrants, to sort their accommodation out. And they're offering landlords, property owners, homeowners, like these amazing sweet 5-year deals. They pay all their rent, they'll pay all their council tax, all their utility bills, guaranteed. So even if some migrant family or something comes into your house for about 6 weeks and then they leave, you still get everything paid for 5 years.
Yeah.
This is not the language of a country that's desperate to solve this crisis. This is capitulation, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of money to be made out of this if you've got no integrity and don't care about the country. You can make a lot of money in the short term from doing a lot of damage. So, there are companies like Serco and their stakeholders who it's in their interest for this to continue to happen, and there's no good reason to make the tough decisions to stop it. So, this is a big problem. There's a lot of money, and that's driving a lot of this. I think one of the reasons it hasn't ended yet is because there's so much profit.
The government should have said to Serco, no, we're not letting you do that. Because the more you expand the accommodation available for migrants, the more they're going to come.
Exactly.
That is just saying, well, essentially it's saying we can't do anything about this, so we just need to find more places for them to stay.
Yeah, it's like if you had a mate call you up and say, can I come and stay? And you go, no, but I'm going to make the bed for you. So, well, what signal are you sending? You're saying, I'm going to prepare the space for you, but no, you can't come. They're saying they can't come, but then they're doing nothing about it when they do come, apart from putting them up, feeding them, clothing them, housing them, giving them, all sorts of pocket money to go out and spend, letting them reign free. These people are, by the way, they're not being detained in any sense in the barracks and the hotels. They're allowed to come and go as they please, and the reason they continue to come back is because, well, it's comfy there, it's nice, it's, they're in a 4-star hotel, they're looked after.
I was talking to Anne Widdecombe earlier about this, and she says, well, what we should do, you and I have discussed many times what we should do about trying to solve this crisis. One way, as you always say, let's leave the European Convention on Human Rights, so we can't be told by some Strasbourg taxi-rank judge in a pub that our policy is all wrong and therefore the plane can't take off, so we could do that. But, one thing we could do, Anne Widdecombe suggested, instead of when they arrive giving them pizzas and then taking them to hotels from which they can immediately disappear if they feel like it, why can't we have a sort of detention centre where so they're detained, so therefore they don't feel quite, so why can't we do that?
Well, we actually did have one in Dover. We had a big detention centre up by Dover Castle, and we closed it down in 2015. And then the boats start coming over about 6 months later and haven't stopped ever since. So we had a facility, purpose-built, designed. It's still up there. I think they use it for escape rooms and sort of, all sorts of silly things now. Like, it's a bit of a
Why
fun
don't we
thing.
reopen it?
Yeah, well, we should. I genuinely don't understand. I think probably they sold off the building, and now, something that was purpose-built from the 50s, which has been there, which is secure. It's an old castle. It's an old fortification. I think it used to be part of the coastal defence during the Second World War, and then it was repurposed into a detention centre. And then 2015, well, let's sell it.
Yeah, I just got to talk to Greg now, but finally, Ben, stick around. We're going to talk to some callers and talk to Greg and stuff. But, the key phrase here, I keep saying it all weekend, where there's a will, there's a way. We don't have the will to solve this crisis.
There is no will. And the moment someone expresses the will, Suella Braverman, it's like, oh, did you by any chance accidentally send an email to the wrong person? You're fired. And it's obviously not about the email. It's not about a security breach. Let's be honest. Let's be clear. There's been plenty worse security breaches by many other cabinet ministers over the years. It was an excuse.
It's a Labour narrative. Yeah. It's a Labour narrative. Let's move over to Greg now. Greg, we need to talk about Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker. She's about 82. I think her husband, Paul, is the same age. Now, Nancy was up in Washington. Paul was at their family home in San Francisco a couple of nights ago. A maniac with a hammer broke in, attacked him, hit him over the head many times with a hammer. He's had to have emergency skull fracture surgery. We're told he's okay. But quite a shocking story. And we don't know much about this attacker yet, but we can assume there's some sort of political motivation, because apparently he's going, where's Nancy? Where's Nancy? This is another tale of America's polarised political situation, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I mean, that sounded like the right story yesterday when this news was first coming out. This crazy man, breaks into their home and says, where's Nancy? But then you start hearing about where he's from, where he lives. He lives in a bus or an abandoned van. He's got obvious mental health issues. It's kind of a good indicator of life in San Francisco right now, which should be something that the Democrats pay more attention to. It should be an indicator of how criminals are treated, which, he probably shouldn't be living in a camp or living outside on the street. So there's some things that are coming out. I'm a little suspicious about this. How did he break into the third most powerful person in the United States' home? Yeah, exactly. Every time Nancy goes to Washington and leaves Paul at home, something bad happens. He either, gets liquored up and drives and gets arrested, or who knows what happened here. Look, I don't wish that on anyone. That it was horrible, but I don't think this is a political thing. Of course, Biden tried to make it into a Jan 6 thing, and it's the ultra MAGA crazy, right wing radicals. No, this is just some idiot that's been let out, shouldn't be living on the street, shouldn't have access to drugs, shouldn't be a criminal that's released without bail because they think bail is racist. I think there's some bigger picture here, guys. I really do.
So you think it's more of a reflection of the lawlessness that prevails in San Francisco and so many other American cities now, L.A., New York, all the big cities have got these massive crime problems.
Yes, and so instead of talking about that, and again, I don't wish it on anyone, but what about the 1,000 people who were victims of homicide last year in Chicago? Mostly minorities, of course, mostly African Americans. It's criminal that they ignore that, and then they get all excited because Paul Pelosi gets beat with a hammer. Again, that's horrible. It's not a good sign about society, about mental health, about the lack of prosecution of criminals. But also, this happens often. It happened to Steve Scalise, who's a leader in the Republican House. Or in the Republican Party, and he was shot at a baseball game in 2017, a congressional baseball game. You've got threats and an attempted murder of Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice. You don't think that was political? I mean, these things are happening. They're happening on both sides of the aisle, but they don't get much attention when it's a conservative that either takes a bullet or there's an attempt on his life. So there's some real hypocrisy here.
But then again, he was screaming, "Where's Nancy?" So he still could just be some
He's
kind
probably still screaming, "Where's Nancy?"
Yeah,
I mean,
but,
you can't take this.
But interestingly, he knew it was their house.
Right. I mean, I'm a little suspicious of this whole thing. I really am. I mean, when I heard the news, I was very upset, and it's really sad. But I'm starting to smell a rat here, and Biden's tried to politicize it and make it a campaign speech right now.
Well, it's not often I've be sympathetic towards Nancy Pelosi, but I am on this one. Poor old lady. I mean, 82 years old,
Again,
her husband, you know.
Sympathetic to all crime victims and their families, but where's all that concern when it's just an average person on the street? Crime is up 140% in many metrics, not just from year over year, but more importantly from 2019. It's really horrible.
What's that song, Let's Go to San Francisco where the flowers grow so very high? They've changed the lyrics now. Let's not go to San Francisco.
I mean, the place is a dump.
Greg, we're going to go to break now.
Great.
When we come back, let's have a little chat about Twitter. The bird is free. Elon Musk owns it. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. Just read a couple of tweets and texts before we get back to my guest, Greg Swenson from the Republican Overseas Organisation here in London. We're still with Ben Lockname from the Bow Group. He's the migrant crisis specialist, so keep your calls coming in about that because we're going to get to you in just a little while. Here's one from Frank on Twitter. Kev, we have to find a solution for the migrant crisis to protect them. What about us? Many are criminals, for goodness sake. The solution is easy. No IDs, send them back to the last country they came from, which is France. for starters, and stop their benefits. God help us. A lot of people probably sympathise with Frank there. This is from Robert in East Sussex. I have a solution. Move them out of the hotels, commission all the Butlins and Pontins holiday centres, employ security, process and send the economic migrants back. Also, he goes on to say, UK unemployed who don't want to work, no more benefits. Force them to work. That's from Robert in East Sussex, last of the great Liberals. And what about people who want to go on holiday to Pontins and Butlins? But, at least he's thinking laterally about some sort of solution. One last quick text. This is from Joe. I believe Labour keeps banging on about Suella Braverman because they want her scalp to humiliate and undermine Rishi's judgment. We want to keep her as Home Secretary. She seems to be the only one so far that is about to crack the illegal migrant crisis. I think that's optimistic, but hopefully civil servants are a hindrance and delaying deportation paperwork. Yeah, well, you're damn right there. I don't think Suella Braverman's going anywhere, and she got that job because she did a deal with the Prime Minister, or the future Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, as when Boris was threatening to beat him in the election for the leadership. And Suella Braverman went or had talks with Rishi Sunak and said, if I pull out and endorse you, you better reappoint me to Home Secretary. That's why she's the Home Secretary. She ain't going nowhere, particularly on the basis that she sent some stupid email that she shouldn't have done. Not much of a big deal, trust me. Right, so before we go to the calls, Greg, a quick word about Elon Musk, world's richest man. Has finally bought Twitter for $44 billion, has sacked all the top woke executives.
Good to see.
He's changed the monitoring system, says Donald Trump is welcome back. I don't think Trump's coming back, but he is welcome back. He says the bird is free, and I've got a lot of sympathy for this, because what it essentially means is those little fascists in Silicon Valley who decide what hate speech is and what you and I are and are not allowed to say are out of business.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous what has happened, and good for Elon Musk. He's putting his money where his mouth is. This might not work, financially. This is a really tough.
He's got about $270 billion. I don't think he cares that much.
Yeah, you don't have to bring a tuna casserole over to Elon Musk's house, but he is a businessman and he is smart. But good for him for deciding that having a digital, town square was important, and to stop the insanity of this one-sided, basically censorship that was going on there. And the list of examples are long, but the most obvious being the Hunter Biden laptop, which was downright censorship. But even you think about the Great Barrington Declaration, all that. It's just outrageous that these wokesters in San Francisco were deciding what people should hear and what people should not hear. Okay, I get it. If it's crazy right-wing, left-wing hate speech or threatening violence, okay, great.
If you threaten violence.
Exactly.
But when you say hate speech, the problem with hate speech, probably with all hate crimes, is who decides what hate
criticizing
is. If it's some little nerd with a backward baseball cap, reading the American equivalent of The Guardian in Silicon Valley, then I'm afraid that's not good enough.
Yeah, it's a good move, and I'm glad to see it. And of course the radical progressive left is whining about it, and they're saying it's Armageddon, but it was great to see these guys fired. He should just move the company out of San Francisco. I think that'd be the best start for him.
Indeed. And Elon Musk is a free speech absolutist, he says, but he actually qualified that. I mean, I class myself as a free speech absolutist. I've always said, if you want to be a racist, you've got the right to be a racist. Sure. I do not like laws that ban things that you might say. But he did qualify it, to be fair. He says, we're going to set up a special monitoring group. He said, I believe in free speech, but there are limits, and we will we'll impose those.
Yeah,
limits.
Follow the law. Obey the laws of the land. I mean, but just let's make it consistent and make it fair. So it's a really good moment for diversity of thought and freedom of speech, so that people will hear directly from their,
Good
whether
day
they
for
agree
you,
or not. That's fine. That's
It's a great
no problem.
day,
It really
and he
is.
walked in carrying a sink, saying, "I'm now chief twit. Let that sink in."
That's
He's
funny.
got the sense of humour of a 4-year-old. How does he get to be the world's richest man? He's a brilliant man.
He
There's
really
no doubt
is.
about it.
Good for him.
And I'm glad he's got Twitter.
Yeah, it's good for him and good for us.
Glad.
Yeah.
Listen, have you both got your? You've got your headphones. Have you got your headphones,
I
Ben?
don't know. I think we can. I think if they're loud enough, we can both.
Yeah,
use it.
that's a good.
All right, put the headphones on really loud. We're going to take some calls. So we're going to go straight to Lenny in Ashford. Hello, Lenny.
Good evening, Kevin.
You'd like to talk about Harry's book?
Yes, I would. I don't think money's got a lot to do with why he's written the book.
What, $38 million? I think it might have something to do with it.
Well, I believe there is no crime in taking money if people throw it at you.
Oh, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Harry's got every right to do this, but it's upsetting the royal family. He's cashing in on his relationship with his dad and his mum, his relatives, his brother. He's cashing in, isn't he?
Well, I believe that purely it's revenge the way that his father treated his mother.
Well, it's not purely that, is it? It's $38 million. But Lenny, nobody just shrugs their shoulders about $38 million. It's a powerful persuader.
No, I don't think money's got. I think his priority is revenge against his father the way he treated his mother.
I don't think it's his priority. I certainly think it's in the equation. I agree with that. His priority is the money.
I don't believe so. I mean, I'm a family man, and if you look at it, I'm older than King Charles, so I remember it all quite vividly. And when Charles married his mother, Camilla was already on the scene.
Yeah.
And to put it in my language so that you might understand, I truly believe that all Charles was looking for was a brood mare. And he checked her pedigree, and she fitted the bill to provide an heir and a spare.
I'm not sure about that.
I think my father would be pleased if I threw him under the bus for $38 million. I think he'd tell me to do it.
Right.
Give me half. Give me half.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, go on, betray me. That's good money. Lenny, interesting theories. I think you're sort of half right, but maybe not altogether right. I think the money's got a lot to do with it. And don't forget that Harry hates Camilla, so that's why this book could be quite interesting. He's not too keen on his dad either, as far as I can work out. Good call, Lenny. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. That's Lenny in Ashford. Let's go to David in Lowestoft. Hi, David.
Hello, shalom, shalom. I've got a good one for you, mate, tonight. A good one for you. It's about Macron.
Macron, okay. Yeah.
Enemy of the EU, who is there to destroy it. And I think we should...
Macron is there to destroy the EU? He loves the EU.
I think he's contributing to the destruction of the EU. And
well, in that case...
I'm a strategist.
In that case, let's let him get on with it, eh?
I think we should take Macron to the European Court of Justice.
No, I don't. No. Let him destroy the EU. What's wrong with him destroying the... David, you've got to stop just talking. All right, David, if you don't just stop talking, then I'm going to cut you off. Don't you think we should let Macron destroy the EU?
Yes, I do.
Well, there you go. Just let him get on with it, then.
But not this country.
Well, why is he destroying this country? We've left the EU.
Because he's allowing them all to come over the channel, and it politically is disrupting our political process.
Well, he certainly, I don't think he's doing much, and nor are his fellow countrymen, to stop the daily invasion of this country by the migrants. As I said,
it's Normandy in reverse.
Well, I'm not sure it's quite that.
Dunkirk.
But we did Dunkirk.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
but how many? 75,000 have come over in the past 4 years. If you multiply that by 50 years, how many families of Albanians are going to be in this country?
Well, we think we estimate that by the year 2050, the entire population of Albania will be living here in Britain. So that's something to worry about.
Mathematics and culture.
David, thank you very much for the call. Good to talk to you. Interesting theories, David in Lowestoft there.
Shalom.
Oh, you know, everyone's. What's all that about?
That was two different topics.
Did he say shalom at the beginning?
He's talking about the EU, and then he talked about the border.
Yeah, he seemed to be. He wasn't very intellectually disciplined, was he?
Well,
but you know, quite interesting viewpoints. Let's go to Brian in North Shields. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Kev. Basically, there are a couple of uninhabited islands on the Channel Islands. We could put a few tin shacks on there, right? Put them in there, process them. Most of them, I would say 99.9% of them are